Hello friends, about of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. I used to be a total couch potato. Seriously, my idea of a workout was channel surfing. But then, I had this health scare, nothing major, thank God, but enough to make me realize I couldn't keep living like that. So I decided to get in shape. Gyms. Boring. So I started running. Audio journey together. Not just anywhere, though. I found these amazing trails in the woods near my place. Think narrow paths winding alongside a babbling brook, birds chirping like crazy, the smell of damp earth and fresh air. It was awesome. Honestly, it felt like I was in some kind of nature documentary. Exhilarating, you know? But that perfect little world I'd found, it all came crashing down a few days ago. I was out for my usual run, trying out a new trail I'd never been down before. I was feeling good, pushing myself a little harder than usual, when all of a sudden, bam, our creative audio journey together. My toe caught on something and I went flying. Full on Superman, except instead of soaring through the air, I face planted in the dirt. My hands shot out in front of me a split second before I hit, which probably saved my face, but still. Pain shot up my elbows and knees. I groaned and slowly pushed myself up, wincing. And that's when I saw it. The thing I'd tripped on. A piece of clothing. My heart started pounding in my chest for some reason. I took a step closer. It was a denim jacket, all twisted and rolled up on itself. It used to be that classic indigo blue, but now it was mostly muddy brown, like the forest was slowly swallowing it up. Okay, not the weirdest thing I'd ever seen in the woods. I'd stumbled across beer bottles, crumpled up paper, even an old baseball cap once. Jardio together, I stood up straight and scanned the woods around me. And that's when I saw something else. Just a few yards off the trail, there was this white shape. It totally stuck out against all the greens and browns of the trees and bushes. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Slowly, audio journey together, I stepped off the trail. Ferns brushed against my calves as I made my way through the underbrush. I cringed, thinking about how many ticks were probably hitching a ride on my legs. But I kept going. I got closer, and my brain still couldn't figure out what the white thing was. But I knew by the color, by the shape, that it just didn't belong there. I took another step and froze. Right next to the white shape was a mess of tangled dark hair. Oh my God, it's a body. The words escaped in a hushed whisper, barely audible over the sudden pounding in my ears. My legs turned to jelly, and for a second, I thought I might actually faint. My mind was racing, a jumbled mess of panic and disbelief. No, this can't be happening. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, as that would somehow erase the image burned into my brain. Audio journey together. When I opened them again, the body was still there, a stark and terrifying reality in the otherwise peaceful woods. I started screaming. I knew no one could hear me. I was miles from the road, from any houses, but I couldn't help it. Audio together. I just screamed and screamed and screamed until I was gasping for air. The woman, it was definitely a woman, was lying face down in the underbrush. The ferns and long grasses had grown up around her, almost like they were trying to hide her. She was practically swallowed up by the plants. Audio journey together. There was no smell, which was weird, but it also meant she'd probably been there for a while. And the white thing, it was her shirt, poking up through the leaves. Oh my God. What do I do? My breath was coming in ragged gasps now, echoing in the empty clearing. Call the police. Right, audio journey together. That's what you do. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, my hands shaking. Then I stopped. A few feet away from the body, lying in the tall grass, was a shoe. I took a step towards it, and my entire body seized up as I got a better look. It was my shoe. No, it was identical to my shoe. Creative audio journey together with pink Nike sneakered, white laces, and a silver swoosh. I tried to swallow, but my throat was like sandpaper. It's a popular sneaker. I mumbled to myself, trying to stay calm. Lots of people wear them. It doesn't mean anything, except... I slowly turned back to the body, tying together. The woman had long dark wavy hair, just like me. She was wearing black leggings and a white t-shirt, exactly what I usually wore on my runs. Exactly what I was wearing right now. The ground beneath me felt like it was spinning. Just a coincidence, I whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Just a coincidence. But I had to know. My legs felt heavy, like lead weights, as I slowly crouched down. I grabbed a stick from the ground nearby and, trying not to gag, I used it to lift a lock of the woman's hair, exposing the gray, dried out skin of her neck. No. A faded tattoo of a cross stared back at me. My breath hitched in my throat. It couldn't be. She had my tattoo. She had my fucking tattoo. I scrambled back, my heel hitting a root, and I lost my balance. I fell backwards, landing hard on the damp dirt. Begin our creative audio journey together. My eyes were glued to the corpse, to the tangled mess of dark hair that looked so much like mine. This can't be happening. I forced myself to stand up. I tore my eyes away from the body and bolted back through the ferns, back to the trail. My heart was hammering against my ribs, our creative audio together, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence. I ran as fast as I could, burning, my lungs aching with every breath. But all I could think about from the body, getting away from the body, getting away from Sarah. I named her Sarah. When I burst out of the trees and onto the main trail, creative audio journey together, I almost slammed right into him. A guy, probably in his late 30s, was walking towards me, earbuds in, probably getting his steps in. Just a normal dude, out for a stroll in the woods. My mind raced. Should I tell him? Should I warn him about Sarah? But the panic was still clawing at my throat, choking on jerking me. I couldn't stop running. I had to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing back there. But then, in that split second as I ran past the guy, the strangest thing happened. He smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile either. It was knowing, creepy. I glanced back, my heart leaping into my throat. He had stopped dead in his tracks. He was watching me, still smiling that awful smile. What the? My legs pumped harder, fueled by a fresh surge of adrenaline. I risked another glance over my shoulder. No. Journey had turned around, and he was starting after me. He was running. Panic flooded me, a cold, sickening wave. My mind flashed back to the body in the woods. Sarah, face down, covered in plants, sunken in gray, forgotten. Was that going to be me? I glanced back again. He was running, creative audio journey together, but he wasn't gaining on me as fast as I thought he would be. Maybe I had a chance. I pushed myself harder, my lungs screaming, my muscles on fire. I rounded another bend, and then, through a gap in the trees, I saw it. The parking lot. And it wasn't empty. There was a family there, a mom, a dad, and 2 little kids. They were just getting ready to head out onto the trail. They could see us. Help! I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. Help me. He's chasing me. Everything happened at once. The dad whipped out his phone, dialing 911, while the mom herded the kids back into the car, her face pale with fear. I risked one last look behind me. The man was gone. Then I saw him, scurrying off into the underbrush, trying to disappear into the trees. But it was too late. They had seen him. The police showed up pretty fast. Our creative audio journey together. They identified the guy as Robert, a local who apparently had a history of stalking women. They found him hiding in the woods, cuffed him, and took him in. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He was caught. But here's the thing. The really messed up thing. They didn't find a body. Audio journey together. I told them everything. About Sarah, about the jacket, the shoe, the tattoo, everything. I took them back to the spot, or at least where I thought it was. But there was nothing there. No body, no sign that anyone had ever been there, except for the trampled ferns where I had run through. Audio journey together. I went back a few weeks later on my own. I was sure, absolutely positive, that I knew where I'd found her. But there was nothing. Just the ferns swaying gently in the breeze, dappled with the warm sunlight of early summer. It was like she had never existed, like I'd imagined the whole thing. The police probably thought I was crazy. Maybe Robert did too, but I know what I saw. I know that body was there. That tattoo. It was my tattoo. The same design, the same placement. So, where did Sarah go? Did Robert move her? Was she ever really there? Our Creo journey together. Did I just have some crazy mental breakdown? I still run on those trails. Not as often, and never on that particular path. And every time I run, I think about her. Sarah. The woman in the woods who looked just like me. The woman who vanished without a trace. And every time, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not just running for exercise anymore. I'm running from something else. Something I can't see, something I can't explain. Something that maybe, just maybe, is still out there, waiting for me in the shadows of the trees. And sometimes, audio journey together. When the wind blows just right, I think I can still hear Robert's chilling smile, carried on the breeze, a constant reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. I named my running shoes after her, Sarah. My hometown of Cedar Creek, Colorado, had this woman, Ms. Albright, who everyone just loved to hate. She was our elementary school's janitor, but she was also the town's favorite punching bag. Anything bad that happened, blame Ms. Albright. Let's begin our creative audio journey together. The old folks in Cedar Creek couldn't stand her because she'd had a son out of wedlock. The town parents looked down on her for giving that son, who they called Hellion, too much freedom, a parenting style which, in their infinite wisdom, had supposedly led to his death. Rumor had it he drowned in the Cedar Creek River, our town's namesake. Us kids, we didn't give a hoot about all that grown-up drama. We just thought Ms. Albright was ugly, and that was enough reason for us to be little jerks. My best friend back then was a curly-haired menace named Finn, our creative audio journey together. By 5th grade, he was basically the king of the neighborhood troublemakers. He made it his personal mission to make Ms. Albright's life miserable, but his pranks never seemed to faze her. We'd whisper about how she smelled bad, making sure she could hear us, but she wouldn't even blink. Begin our creatio journey together. We'd let loose a bunch of bugs in her janitor's closet, and she'd just calmly sweep them outside. We even stuffed rotten food in her locker once, and she just cleaned it out, quiet as a mouse, without a single complaint. Our usual tricks were useless against Ms. Albright. I mean, audio journey together. The woman cleaned up messes for a living. We were just a bunch of dumb kids, and we couldn't figure out how to get under her skin. In my last year of elementary school, Hanukkah came super early, like a week and a half before winter break. All the Jewish kids in school, including me, loved showing off our presents, rubbing it in the faces of everyone who had to wait forever for Christmas. Now, thanks to Kim Possible's Spy Kids, and Totally Spies, everyone in Cedar Creek was obsessed with being a spy. So when Finn got a spy tech kit for kids, together, he became even more popular than he already was. Most of the kit was cheap plastic crap, but there was this one thing, the spy radio, that seemed pretty legit. It had an earpiece and a tiny button-sized microphone that could supposedly transmit sound up to 5 miles away. Me, Finn, journeyed together, and our crew spent most of that week running all over town, testing the thing out. The sound quality was surprisingly good, but the earpiece and microphone could only be about 3 miles apart before things got too fuzzy to understand. It was fun for a few days, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. But we got bored of playing walkie-talkie. Finn wanted to use it for its real purpose as spying, and he had the perfect target in mind. On the last day before winter break, me and Finn glued the tiny microphone to the back of an old brooch we found in his sister's jewelry box. Together, we covered it with a piece of velvet and glued the pin back on. When we were done, you couldn't even tell it was there. We put it in a little white box, which I then shoved into my backpack. We figured I should be the one to give it to her since Finn had a reputation for being a prankster. After school, I found Ms. Albright in the staff break room. She barely glanced at me when I walked in. I noticed a wall of cubbies along the far side of the room, each one with a staff member's name on it. Every single one was overflowing with gifts and cards, all together, probably from parents or other teachers. Every one except hers. "You're not supposed to be in here, kid," Ms. Albright said to me in her gravelly voice. "I know," I said, swinging my backpack around to the front. I rummaged around for the box. It was a little beat up from being in my bag, Journey Together, but I figured she wouldn't care. I pulled it out and held it out to her. "But I wanted to give you this before break." She stopped packing her things and turned to face me fully. She just stood there for a long moment, staring at the box like it was a bomb. Then, she set her bag down, took a few steps forward, and snatched the box out of my hand. She shook it a little, then opened it slowly. When she saw the brooch, she carefully lifted it out and turned it over in her hand. She paused again, looking back and forth between the sparkly, fake emerald and me. "It's not new. Sorry. It used to be my mom's," I told her, sticking to the script me and Finn had come up with. We figured it would make the whole thing seem more believable. "She doesn't wear it anymore, but I thought you might like it." Ms. Albright kept staring at me, her face totally blank. "Let's begin our creative audio journey together." I half expected her to chuck the thing in the trash can in the corner, but, to my surprise, she gave me a single nod. "Thank you," she said, and carefully pinned the brooch to her cardigan like it was some priceless jewel and not a piece of junk. I gave her a smile, which she didn't return. Journey together. And then she shooed me out of the room. Finn was waiting for me in the woods outside school. I gave him a thumbs up, and he slapped my back twice in congratulations. He pulled the earpiece out of his backpack and held it between us. I put my ear up to it, and sure enough, I could hear something. It was a little more muffled now, because of the velvet, but the sound was still really clear. We could hear the crunch of snow under Ms. Albright's feet as she walked home through the woods. We listened, practically bouncing with excitement, for a few minutes, then raced back to my house to celebrate our victory with hot chocolate. We were 10-year-old boys with the attention span of gnats, so we totally forgot about our master plan until just before Finn's mom came to pick him up. That's when I remembered, and I grabbed the earpiece, which we decided would stay at my house since it was closer to Ms. Albright's. I put it to my ear and listened. More than last year, but not as much as the year before last. "What do you think about it? Can you feel like it?" "So I see. Me personally, our creative audio journey together. I've loved it since I was a little girl. It falls so prettily." "What the heck is she saying?" Finn asked me like I had any clue. The bigger question, at least in my mind, was who the heck was she talking to? She didn't have any kids or a husband, and as far as I knew, she and audio together, she didn't have any friends either. "I dunno," I said. "She's talking about snow, I think." Though the question, "Can you feel it?" seemed a weird thing to ask, no matter who you were talking to. We sat there listening to her ramble on for a solid 5 minutes. I'd never heard Min's creative audio journey together. Albright talked that much in my entire life, and I'd been seeing her almost every day since I was 5. Looking back, I'm not really sure what we were expecting, but it definitely wasn't a monologue that long. We strained our ears, listening for another voice, but there was nothing. "Maybe she's schizophrenic," Finn suggested. I had no idea what that was, but I trusted his expert opinion. His mom showed up to take him home, and I turned the speaker off to walk him outside. After that, every once in a while, I'd turn the speaker on and listen. Arnie together. It seemed like no matter what time it was, early in the morning or late at night, Ms. Albright was always talking. She talked about all sorts of stuff, everything from clothes to stocks to the weather to politics. Sometimes she'd pray. Our journey together, talking so fast and quiet that I could only catch like 1 out of every 5 words. She apologized a lot and kept talking about a promise. Sometimes, when I turned on the speaker, all I could hear was sobbing. And sometimes, the conversations were just plain bizarre. Together. Young woman smiled at me today at the grocery market. Isn't that just the sweetest thing? I felt like it's been so long since someone smiled at me like that through yes. I know she was just doing her job. Probably doesn't even know my name. Huh? Oh, how hard this has been. How lonesome. Let's begin our creative audio journey together. But I am so very close to the finish line. I won't break my promise now. A few days before we went back to school, me and Finn decided to trek over to her house to try and figure out who she was talking to. I'd seen her house a few times before, and each time I was struck by how tiny it was. Audio journey together. It was this isolated, beat-up looking shack at the edge of the southern woods, on a big piece of land, off a street that hardly anyone ever drove down. I remember standing there on the side of the road with Finn staring at the house. It was so small, there was barely room for a bedroom, audio together, a bathroom, and maybe a tiny kitchen. There's no way anyone else lives there. Finn said after we'd been standing there staring for a while. We were too far away to see inside the windows, but we were also too chicken to get any closer. She's either a witch, or she's just some sad, ugly old lady who went crazy from having no friends. Finn got bored pretty fast, so we left not long after that. We were partway down the street when something made me turn around and look back at the house one last time. And there she was, Miss Albright, standing on the porch, staring radio-jarred at us. I whipped back around and grabbed Finn's arm. She's watching us. My whispers got wide. His eyes wide. Shit, he said. Should we run? No, that'll look suspicious. Let's just keep walking. We walked until we were out of sight. And then we booked it all the way home. I don't know why we were so freaked out. But for some reason, even when I was back in the safety of my own house, I couldn't shake the feeling of someone's eyes drilling into my back. And soon they'll all be coming back, begin of audio journey together. It's hard seeing them sometimes, knowing my Owen was among them once. Sometimes I think I see him. At least it'll get easier soon, thanks to you. By the time we went back to school, my friends had pretty much forgotten about the whole speedier thing. I offered to give Finn back his speaker, but he said it was basically useless now since we couldn't get the microphone back. Surprisingly, Ms. Albright kept wearing the brooch every single day. She always pinned it to her regular clothes, so the only time she was unbugged, as Finn put it, audio journey together, was when she was in her janitor's uniform at school. Seeing how she guarded that brooch made me feel kinda bad. Was that the only present she'd gotten for Christmas? Was it the only present she'd gotten in the past 10 years? Maybe she wasn't a witch or crazy. Maybe she was just lonely, and talking to herself was how she coped. Months when Finn and his crew, finally accepting that they'd never get a rise out of Ms. Albright, moved on to terrorizing some grumpy old man who lived across from the elementary school. He was always yelling at kids for one reason or another. Audio journiter. I was happy for Ms. Albright that they'd finally left her alone. One day in March, I found her sitting on a bench at the edge of the school grounds during lunch. I sat down next to her, not really expecting anything. She glanced at me, then went back to staring at the sad-looking sandwich in her hand. What do you want? She asked, not looking at me. Nothing. Just wanted to sit here. She picked at her sandwich. We're not friends, kid. I know. You don't have any friends. That's righted. She nodded. Maybe one day. Audio journey though, I said. And to my surprise, she laughed. I didn't even know she could laugh. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in our little non-conversation, and I saw that she was smiling. It was a rusty, awkward smile, but it was real. Yeah, she said. Maybe one day. Ms. Artiani together. Albright packed up and headed back inside the school building after that. She left a bag of mini Oreos on the bench next to me. I think she did it on purpose. I got used to checking in on her every now and then, listening to her conversations with herself. Sometimes, creating her, it almost felt like she was talking to me. Looking back on it now, I realize what a little snoop I was, and what a huge invasion of privacy it was. I wish I could take it all back now, especially after what happened next. Friday, May 17th. Begin our creative audio journey together. It was the 10-year anniversary of Owen Albright's death. I kept an eye all day, but she didn't seem any sadder than usual. Maybe things were finally looking up for her. Anyway, even though I hadn't checked in on her for a while, I decided that evening to see how she was doing. My parents were gone for the weekend, and I was only allowed to stay home alone if I stayed inside the whole time, so I didn't have anything better to do. Not long after sunset, as I was sprawled out on my bedroom floor, I turned on the earpiece. Miss Albright was talking to herself, like always, but there was something different about her tone. She sounded more excited than I'd ever heard her. Almost there, almost there, almost there. She kept repeating those two words over and over until, at exactly 11:44 p.m., she let out a sound that I only understood years later to be a cry of triumph. It is done, dark angel. Thank you, thank you. 10 years of solitude, and it was worth every second. Now, angel, bring him back to me. Bring him back to me. What was she on about now? Or Creatio Journevo, were those song lyrics or something? I strained my ears, listening for another person out of habit, but of course, there was only Miss Albright's voice. After a moment, her happy cries faded, and her voice got all confused. What do you mean? No, that can't be true. I kept my promise. Audio journey together. I followed every rule. I let no one in companions, made no friends. I kept my wishes secret, as you told me. My angel, I sat up slowly, the growing terror in her voice putting me on edge even from miles away. And then she question that still haunts me to this day. What do you mean I had an audience? There was a moment of silence, and then the unmistakable sound of the velvet backing of the brooch being ripped off. I could hear her breathing sharper and clearer than ever before, as she repeated a single word. No, 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 no. She moved away from the microphone, her rapid breaths replaced by what sounded like her front door being thrown open with a bang. Then, there was no more noise. I remember standing up in my bedroom, audio journey together, not really understanding what had just happened, and not really knowing what to do next. Something told me that I should go downstairs and make sure the doors were locked. So I told myself to suck it up, and I forced myself to go downstairs into the dark first floor. I went around the whole house, checking all the doors and windows. Once I was done, I just stood there. Somehow, I knew she was coming, and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as it got louder, I realized I was hearing wailing. Oh, Creatio journey together. I heard it long before I saw her, that gut-wrenching cry, that sound that I had previously only heard weak imitations of in movies where a mother loses her child. Standing there in the darkness of my living room, I watched her sprint out of the tree line towards my house. Her mouth was wide open, her eyes were glazed over, and she was wearing a white nightgown. She looked and sounded like something out of my worst nightmares. I dropped to the floor and crawled away from the window, hiding behind the couch. Why? She howled, her mournful voice rising and falling as she climbed the steps to my front porch and slammed her fist against the door. Why? I needed to get to the phone, but the house phone was right next to the window, and I was terrified. She hit the door so hard I thought the hinges were going to break. He go killed you. Yo do thistiomedi. I clamped a hand over my mouth. She couldn't possibly know for sure that I was in the house, could she? The wailing moved as she rounded the wrap-around porch, already journeyed together. The heavy pounding of her fists against the door, replaced by the thudding of her shoes on the wooden porch floor. I peeked around the couch and didn't see anyone at the front window, but when I looked to the side window, I saw a face hovering inches from the glass. A journey together. I screamed at the top of my lungs as her fist smashed through the window, sending glass and blood flying everywhere. I was so horrified by the shattered glass that I almost didn't see the shotgun strapped to her back. Sure that I was about to die, I screamed at her to go away, together to leave me alone, and she screamed right back at me, asking me questions I didn't understand. Dogs started barking at all the commotion, and my next door neighbor's porch light turned on. "Please just go away," I shrieked, finally finding my feet and racing to the phone. I grabbed it, Jardio together, starting to dial 911 as I tried to decide if I should risk running to the neighbor's house. But when I looked back at the broken window, she was gone. The wailing had stopped, getting fainter until I couldn't hear it at all. I stood there frozen, my hand shaking. She was gone, Rio journey together. I was sure of it. Should I still call the police? After a moment, I heard another, quieter sound, and recognized the staticky audio immediately as coming from Finn's spy gear. I raced back upstairs, still clutching the phone, and grabbed the speaker from where I dropped it on the floor. Audiarni together, I pressed it to my ear, listening to the faint sound of a familiar voice. "I hope this was worth it, kid," it said, cold and calm. "I hope you and your friends can laugh about this." I heard a bang, and then I heard nothing at all. It took 2 weeks for the police to find her body. She was deep in the woods, under a thick bunch of juniper bushes, not far from the banks of the Cedar Creek River. Her face was messed up beyond recognition, so they identified her by the shotgun lying next to her. They say that creative audio journey together. Even though she was covered in enough blood to attract every animal for miles, her body was untouched. Even the bugs seemed hesitant to feed on her, and the mold was slow to grow, like even the smallest creatures were afraid of being tainted by the lonely woman in the woods. They didn't find the brooch on her. Journey together. I wish I'd snapped a picture. Hell, even a drawing. Anything to capture what it looked like back then. But I was too ashamed to even talk about it until now. Because what happened? Yeah, it's part language, only my fault. See, I'm a sign lampreter, and back then, fresh out of school, audio journey together, I was still pretty green. Maybe if I'd been better at my job, things would have gone differently. I still replay it all the time, thinking what if I had done this or that. So, there was this gig, right? Interpreting for an animal tracking and wilderness exploration class. Sounded kinda cool, and honestly, I really needed the work. Plus a bit of adventure for a newbie like me. I was in. I accepted the job and showed up half an hour early, like a good little interpreter. Nerves were eating at me, though. Meeting a new deaf person always made me anxious back then. What if I couldn't understand them? What if we didn't vibe? What if they signed a mile a minute and had zero patience for a beginner like me? It is silly now, looking back on those days, but I had no confidence. So, I figured going early would give me a chance to get some context, you know? Learn her preferred signs for all the outdoorsy stuff. But things got rocky from the get-go. I hopped out of my beat, up Honda, ready to introduce myself, and she immediately signed, "You're late. You were supposed to be here half an hour ago." "Oh, I'm so sorry. Maybe the agency gave me the wrong time," I stammered, my hands already fumbling. Seriously, of all days to mess up the time, I was a nervous wreck as it was. I said, "You must be SAR." Her name was Sarah, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. But in that moment, my mind went completely blank on the spelling. She quickly corrected me, her fingers moving so fast I barely caught the first letter. But then she gave me her name sign, her hand in an S shape, brushing the tip of her thumb against her cheek twice. Easy enough, audio together. Thank goodness. Then, rolling her eyes, she opened her mouth and spoke aloud in that distinct deaf accent. "Okay, well, the interpreter's here now, so I guess we can get started, everyone." Trying to hide how relieved I was that she voiced for herself, I fell into step behind her and her students. There were only 3, a father and son and a middle-aged woman. "This is it?" I asked, looking around, surprised. I had expected at least a dozen people. The guide shrugged. "It's freezing out here this morning. Lots of folks probably decided to stay in their nice, warm beds." Then she spoke aloud to the trio. "The fresh snow is great for seeing tracks, though." The man and his son were named Ben and Ollie. Ollie, who was 9, was bouncing off the walls with excitement. begin our cardio journey together, claiming to see a deer behind every other tree. He reminded me of myself at that age. Ben was the definition of a laid-back dad, constantly cracking jokes that made me groan internally. It was obvious he was only here because his kid was obsessed with animals. Our last member, Maggie, begin the audio together, was a woman with graying hair and arms full of what she called healing gemstone bracelets. She told us she was into foraging for herbs and mushrooms, and the positive energy you could draw from nature. The freshly fallen snow had this crunchy, icy crust, our creative audio journey together, and it made this satisfying sound under our boots as we set off down the wintry trail. The sun was hitting the snow just right, making it sparkle like a field of diamonds. Since the guide didn't need me to voice for her, my job was surprisingly chill. I just signed whenever one of the three hearing chimed in with a comment or question, or, in Ben's case, another terrible dad joke. 20 minutes flew by, and then we took a break so Oli could, predictably, run off into the bushes to pee. While we waited, our guide turned to me, her eyes surprisingly sharp. She was a lively woman, with laugh lines around her eyes and just a hint of gray in her hair. "Nice to be an interpreter, huh?" she signed. "I bet you go to all sorts of interesting gigs." "This is definitely the coolest," I replied, and I meant it. Together. I told her I mostly interpreted college classes. One usually teamed up with a more experienced interpreter, since I was still new to the field. Her smirk seemed to say, "Yeah, I can tell." But she was gentler now that we were on the trail, and remarked, "Worth coming out on a freezing Saturday morning." "You mean Friday?" "No, Saturday. Saturday. Definitely Friday." I double-checked my calendar and showed her. "Oh shoot. I get so mixed up sometimes." She laughed, and I felt the tension between us ease a little. Then she looked worried. "Maybe you were early instead of late. I hope I don't have other students waiting for me back at the parking lot. Oh God, what if I got the time wrong?" For a second, too, a shadow crossed her face. But then, like the sun breaking through clouds, she grinned, noticing something in the bushes. Raspberries. All I saw were thorny sticks, practically bent in half under the weight of the snow. Our guide chuckled and explained, voicing as she did for the others. "Raspberries are pretty easy to spot. See how these canes grow tall, and then loop back down to the ground. Audio journey thither. The laterals, these side branches, that's where the berries grow. You can recognize them by the leaves, always in a trio." She touched a few remaining dead leaves. "Raspberries, huh?" said Ben, as Ollie reappeared from his pee break, inspecting the thorny bushes. "Hey Ollie, you know how to tell if it's a raspberry bush?" "The leaves," he said, repeating what our guide had just told us. "That's her way. But I'll let you in on a secret, easier way." Ben leaned down and whispered loudly in his son's ear. "Just look for the red berries. Then you know, raspberry bush." We all chuckled at Ben's usual dad-ness, while Ollie loudly protested that there are no berries in winter. Ollie was a character, always eager to show off his supposed knowledge of nature. Ben, for all his goofy jokes, seemed to encourage it, cardio journey together, which was kind of sweet. Maggie, on the other hand, seemed more interested in the spiritual energy of the plants, as she put it, than any actual facts. But the berries were quickly forgotten when our guide pointed out some animal tracks up ahead in the snow. Our first real tracks, two oval, shaped indents, clearly deer hoofprints, marched across our path and disappeared into the trees. Ollie immediately wanted to follow them, but our guide convinced him it was best to stick to the trail. She was good at handling Ollie, firm but patient, journey together. I could tell she'd been doing this for a while. Soon, we identified rabbit and squirrel tracks, even some bird prints. But then, as we reached a dip in the trail leading to a narrow stream, our guide frowned at a set of very large tracks. Our crew journeyed together. They came from the trail beyond and vanished into the stream in front of us. They almost looked human. Almost. But the toes were longer, more spread out. She said it was hard to get a clear rid on them, because whatever made them was shuffling through the snow, making the prints blurry and stretched out. It was strange even I could see that. These tracks were definitely different from anything we'd seen so far. Ooh, a mystery. Ben nudged Ollie, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Ben seemed to be enjoying this more than he let on. Maybe this whole wilderness exploration thing wasn't just for Ollie's sake after all. Let's follow them. Ollie squealed, already starting to move towards the stream. Is it safe? It's not a bear, is it? Maggie asked, a hint of worry in her voice. She fingered one of her gemstone bracelets, a nervous habit I'd noticed. No, definitely not a bear, the guide assured us. She studied the tracks again, frowning. She concerned, maybe even a little uneasy. He came down the very trail we'll be taking if we cross the stream. And let's begin our creative audio journey together, but since the tracks went into the stream, and presumably came out somewhere else, following them means we'd be going in the direction the animal came from, not where it's headed. So, we probably won't run into it. Besides, she added, with a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, there aren't any big, dangerous animals in these woods. I've been doing this for years. After a moment of thought, she declared we'd finish the trail loop. Once we get over the hill, she explained, pointing ahead, it will curve around a meadow and take us back to the parking lot. What if they're human tracks? Maggie said, her voice a little shaky. A hiker went missing here last year. What if it's them? Our guide looked skeptical. Are you sure you're not thinking of a different park? I've worked here for years, and I've never heard of anyone going missing, except one hiker who got found a day or two later, safe and sound. No, it was definitely here, Maggie insisted, her voice more certain now. I remember because I avoided coming here for months afterward, even though I live pretty close. The story just freaked me out. Maggie, for all her talk of healing energies, seemed easily spooked. Maybe she wasn't connected to the positive vibrations of nature as she claimed. A hiker wouldn't be wandering around out here for a whole year, radio together, especially barefoot. There've been tons of people on this trail since then. The guide dismissed the idea with a shrug. It's broad daylight and we are 4 people. Ollie, of course, was already way ahead of us, splashing across the stream and charging through the snow. Already journey together, the tracks go up here. He shouted, his voice echoing back to us. Hey, Ollie. Don't run so far ahead. Ben hollered after him, though he didn't sound too worried. I guess he figured his son was safe enough with us around. We all hurried to catch up, our boots crunching on the fresh snow. Go journey together. The sun was bright, the air was crisp and clean, and for a moment, despite the weird tracks, everything felt almost normal. But that feeling wouldn't last. Ollie had stopped at the top of the hill, a small figure against the bright sun, staring at something. As we caught up, audio journey together, panting and out of breath from the climb, we saw what had him so captivated. Here, at the crest of the hill, the trail forked. And it was like something out of a storybook, a clear, distinct split in the path. One way led down across a wide, open field, bathed in sunlight. It looked inviting, peaceful. This path gently looped back toward the woods, the stream, and, presumably, the parking lot where we had started. The other path, the one with the strange, unsettling tracks, went through a dense thicket of trees and into a dark gap in a rocky cliff face. It vanished into the shadows. This path looked together. Wrong. Unnatural. It sent a shiver down my spine. Which way do we go? Maggie asked, her gaze fixed on the sunnier path. She was practically hugging herself despite the bright daylight. I couldn't blame her. That dark path looked seriously creepy. But Ollie, predictably, audio journey together, was all in for the mystery. He kept pointing at the tracks and the cave entrance, his whole body practically vibrating with anticipation. Please, can we follow the tracks? Please, can't we just see what's in there? He was bouncing on the balls of his feet, eyes wide with excitement. I dunno, buddy, Ben said, his usual carefree tone a little strained. He was looking at the dark path with a frown. Even he seemed to have a bad feeling about this. You sure you want to go into a spooky dark cave? Why, yes, Ollie shouted, radio together, loud enough to make a few birds take flight from a nearby tree. Our guide, meanwhile, was pursing her lips, her expression unreadable. She caught my eye and signed. They could be human tracks. If they are, they're barefoot, and the way they're dragging their feet, they one need help. If there's any camping gear in that cave, maybe it's someone who got stuck out here. But her eyes narrowed on the cliff wall, a deep line forming between her brows. There was something about that cave entrance that was really bothering her. She motioned for me to follow her, audio journey together, and we started following the footprints. Three's Ollie immediate, which meant everyone else did too. There was no stopping that kid. As we got closer to the split in the rock face, the guide paused and signed to me. I'm gonna see what's in there. The thing is, journey together. I've hiked these trails for years. I don't remember there being a fork like this. It's too weird. This shouldn't be here. I need to check it out. Stay with the group. I'll let you know if it's safe, if it just ends up being an empty cave or something. Her hands were moving quickly, but there was a tension in them, a tightness that mirrored the unease I was feeling. Are you sure you don't want me to? I started to sign, but she cut me off. Stay. She signed firmly, her expression leaving no room for argument. Then she turned and called out to the others, our creative audio journey together, her voice surprisingly steady. Stay here. I'm gonna go check and make sure it's safe. The wait felt like an eternity. Each tick of the clock seemed to echo in the silence. We had left the sun behind us, and now we stood in the cold shadow of that cliff, audio journey together. It felt like the temperature had plummeted 20 degrees in an instant. And it wasn't just a chill on my skin. It felt like the cold had seeped deep into my bones, into my very core. A spike of fear, sharp and icy, shot through me, and it grew stronger with every passing second, audio journey together. My heart was racing, pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Suddenly, I felt like I understood what people meant when they talked about bad vibes or negative energy. This place felt wrong. That path was wrong here. We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be here. And those tracks, something human, or not quite human, the thought made my stomach churn. What did that even mean? Waiting for our guide felt like forever. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch made me jump. Even Ben had lost his usual humor, his face pale and drawn, audio together. Maggie was muttering to herself, clutching her gemstones like they were some kind of lifeline. And Ollie, even he had finally stopped bouncing, his youthful energy replaced by a nervous stillness. Finally, we heard it, the crunch of snow, the sound of someone approaching, creative audio journey together. I let out a shaky breath of relief as the guide appeared at the mouth of the cave, her silhouette dark against the slightly brighter light behind her. She called out, her voice echoing in the stillness, "It's safe. Everyone, come on." Ollie, as if a spell had been broken, bolted ahead, rushing towards the cave entrance. Ben and Maggie followed, a little more hesitantly but still drawn forward. The guide called out again, the same words. "It's safe. Everyone, come on." But her hands were moving. The others probably just thought she was signing, "Let's go." A simple, encouraging gesture. Looking back, I wish I'd had more experience. I wish I'd trusted my eyes more. Trusted that gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. Because maybe then I would have shouted a warning, "RDO journey together." Maybe I could have stopped them. If I'd been a better interpreter, could I have stopped what happened? I don't know. I was still trying to figure it all out, confused because what I was hearing and what I was seeing didn't match up. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Her voice said, clear as a bell, "It's safe. Everyone, come on." But the pointer finger of her right hand slid between the spread fingers of her left and then jerked outward. Like her pointer finger was escaping, breaking free. It was the sign for run, run, run. "Don't follow her," I yelled, audio journey together, my voice cracking with panic. But it was too late. My shout was lost in the echoing silence of the cave entrance. Holly and Maggie were already inside, swallowed by the darkness. Ben was a little slower, and he glanced back at me for a split second, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He hesitated, one foot in the sunlight, one in the shadows. Did he hear me? Did he understand? I'll never know. Because in the next instant, he plunged into the darkness after his son, his silhouette disappearing into the black. Now it was just me and the guide. She turned to look at me. He's going to journey together. Her face bathed in the faint, ethereal light filtering from the cave mouth. And it was her face, the face of the woman who called herself Helen. The face I had thought belonged to Sarah. The face of the guide who was supposed to be helping us. And for a second I could almost believe that everything was all right. But then her face contorted. Her lips pulled back, stretching over her teeth and gums in a grotesque, unnatural grin. Her eyes widened, the pupils shrinking to tiny black pinpricks in the dim light. For a split second, she looked like a corpse, something long dead and decayed, something that should have stayed buried. Then I blinked, and she was smiling again, just a normal, friendly smile. But the image was burned into my mind, a horrifying snapshot I knew I'd never forget. Her hands lifted, spasmed, journeyed together, and shook, as if fighting against some unseen force. And then, instead of signing run, instead of warning me away, her arms moved stiffly, jerkily like a puppet's controlled by unseen strings. Komi. Now her voice and gestures matched, a chilling harmony, and she said, her voice a soft murmur. Come on, it is alright. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, not caring about the icy ground, the uneven terrain, or the branches that whipped at my face. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the trees and onto the open field, the sun blinding me after the dimness of the woods. I didn't stop running until I reached the parking lot, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. When I finally made it back to the parking lot, I was shocked to see a group of people standing around in the snow, looking lost and confused. A young deaf woman with long dark hair was at the front, signing angrily at her phone screen, her movements sharp and agitated. I waved at her, gasping for breath. Are you with the wilderness group? I need help. Oh, finally. She spun around, her hands flying fast, demanding to know why I was late, where I had been. She was furious. Flustered, I interrupted her, trying to explain about our guide, about the cave, about the tracks, about SARAH. What are you talking about? She cut me off, her brows furrowed in confusion. I am Sarah. What? My mind reeled. Then who had I been interpreting for? Who had taken us out on the trail? It turns out the name sign I showed her, the S hand brushed against my cheek, belonged to a woman named Helen, who used to be the trail guide here, a legend in these parts. She was Sarah's mentor and had even hired her. Helen's been missing since last year. Sarah explained, her hands slowing as she signed, her expression a mixture of sadness and frustration. She disappeared while she was out on a trail with a group, journey together. She went to check out some weird tracks and never came back. No one knows what happened to her. Last year. Had that trek been on a Saturday, 10 a.m. instead of 11 a.m. A chill deeper than any winter cold settled in my bones. Suddenly, all the things that hadn't added up, all the inconsistencies, the rendezvous journey together, the wrong day, the wrong name, they all made a terrifying kind of sense. Sarah insisted I lead her to the fork in the trail where her mentor had vanished. She had to see it for herself. We followed the crisp, clear footprints in the snow, creative audio journey together, my own and those of the others, all the way to the stream and up to the top of the hill. My heart pounded in my chest with every step, dread pooling in my stomach. But there was no fork anymore. The hill was just a hill, the trail just a trail. There was no dark cave, no split in the path, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. In fact, there were no footprints other than mine coming from the other side of the stream. It looked like I had just gone up the hill, walked around in a few circles up there, perhaps in confusion or panic, and then run, audio journey together. Run all the way back to the parking lot, leaving no trace of anyone else ever having been there. But as we got back to the parking lot, I noticed something. Something that made my blood run cold. In the crisp snow, you could clearly see the prints our boots had made. Mine, Ben's, Ollie's, and Ned, Maggie's, boots, little boots, all with different treads, clear and distinct. But I couldn't find any prints matching the boots I'd seen. Helen wearing the sturdy hiking boots she'd had on. The last set of prints among our group from the parking lot. Shuffling around in the spot where Helen had been standing, the place where she'd first greeted me, were barefoot with long, elongated toes, just like the strange tracks we'd found in the snow. They were not human. They couldn't be. Okay, so, picture that this Sarah was burnt out. Like, seriously, I hadn't taken a real vacation in 2 freaking years. Work was this never-ending grind, and my tiny department was running on fumes. Then, by some miracle, we actually hired someone competent. Someone who could actually handle some of the workload. My boss, Mark, practically shoved me out the door, telling me to use up some of my vacation time before I keeled over at my desk. The problem, I hate flying. Like, hate it, panic attacks, the whole 9 yards. So, that limited my options considerably. And skiing. Nope, not my thing. I'm more of a curl up with a good book kind of gal. So, basically, I was screwed. A 2-week staycation in my cramped apartment loomed before me, promising nothing but reruns and microwave meals. Then, cordiality together, as I was mindlessly scrolling through some travel website at work, trying to look busy, and had popped up a cabin in the woods, near that ski resort everyone raved about, but not actually at the resort, which meant peace and quiet. The photos looked almost too good to be true. This massive audio journey together. Cozy log cabin, just sitting there empty in the middle of a snowy forest. And the price. Surprisingly decent. I started daydreaming about crackling fires, snow-covered trees, and finally tackling that mountain of books I'd been neglecting. I booked it. Spur of the moment. Creative audio journaler, which isn't really like me, but hey, I was desperate. Fast forward to the end of the week and I'm packed and ready to go. The drive wasn't too bad. The cabin was on this one-lane road that wound through the woods. Kinda spooky, but the directions were clear, even though the address wasn't showing up on my GPS. Thank goodness it was a straight shot. I figured I'd see some deer or something, but the whole drive was strangely quiet. Not even a bird. Just trees and more trees. And then, I saw it. The cabin. And let me tell you, the pictures didn't do it justice. This place was breathtaking. Huge logs, a big porch, smoke curling from the chimney. I half expected a lumberjack to come striding out, axe in hand. Seriously, how did I snag this place for such a good price? Someone had cleared the walkway and steps of snow recently, but there weren't any footprints. Weird. It took a few trips to haul all my stuff inside, but I managed. Glad someone had maintained the walkway. I'd have probably broken my neck slipping on ice. It was freezing inside. I have audio journey together, so I got the heat going and built a fire in the massive stone fireplace. Then, I raided the kitchen. I'd brought mostly snacks, figuring I'd make a grocery run to town, but the pantry was stocked. Like, seriously stocked. Canned goods, pasta, even some fancy hot chocolate. And there was a note. It said, "Help yourself. Enjoy your stay." What was this place? Some kind of magical cabin that takes care of its guests. The drive hadn't even been that long, but I was exhausted. Years of stress and overwork just hit me like a ton of bricks. I piled some more wood on the fire, figuring it would last a few hours, curled up on the couch under a mountain of blankets, and, well, I crashed. Hard. Next thing I know, it's the middle of the night. I woke up to this knocking. The fire had died down to embers, and my stomach was growling. Pre-and together, I stumbled up to throw another log on the fire, and the knocking came again. Someone was at the doors. I froze. My heart was pounding, and I was so tired, like even more tired than before I fell asleep. It was weird. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. Even though the room was warming up, should I answer it? Who the hell would be out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour? At first, I was sure it was someone dangerous. Then I thought, if they wanted to break in, they wouldn't knock first. Still, I grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace just in case. "Hello," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Oh, hello. I'm a bit lost. Can you tell me if there's a town nearby?" A woman's voice, young, maybe my age. My hand hovered over the doorknob. But what if it was a trick? What if she had some huge, burly dude waiting to burst in the second I opened the door? "Yeah, there's a town down the main road," I said, wondering how she could even get here without taking the road. "Road. Oh, I see your tire tracks. Maybe I could follow them. Begin our creative audio journey together. Hey, are you alright in there or do you need help getting out?" She asked, like that was a totally normal question. What was she talking about? A chill, colder than the cabin had been, ran down my spine. I opened my mouth to answer when something in the living room window caught my eye. It was pitch black outside, but then, a shape, white pale. It was getting closer to the glass. My blood turned to ice as a face materialized out of the darkness. A gellish face. Wide grinning mouth. Dark, empty eyes. It pressed against the window, staring at me. Then, Biengi Bai, our creative audio journey together, being on the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. When I looked back, the face in the window was gone. I ran to grab my phone, my hands shaking. The damn thing wouldn't turn on. Dead. The banging on the door continued, echoing through the silent cabin as I fumbled with the charger. Still nothing. I started checking all the doors, making sure they were locked, my heart hammering in my chest. As I passed the windows, I saw them. More of those pale faces, staring in, their dark eyes burning into me. What the hell was going on? Then I noticed something. Our journey together. A cord hanging at the top of one of the kitchen windows. I reached up and pulled it. Wooden shutters slid out from the wall and locked into place at the bottom. They wouldn't stop someone determined to get in, but it was something. I went around the whole cabin, finding the cords, audio journey together, and closing the shutters. Every window had them. The banging got quieter with each window I covered. I even ran upstairs and shuttered the bedroom windows, just in case. The whole time, I could hear that girl's voice outside, offering to help, telling me to just come outside. Yeah, right. Like that was going to happen. When the last shutter was closed, the noise outside stopped. Checked the landlines. Dead. My cell phone. Still dead. I was trapped. Safe for now, but trapped. I had food for a week. Mark knew where I was going. He'd send someone if I didn't show up for work. Right, but a week. I didn't want to let it out. Now, I stoked the fire again, trying to get warm. The chill had seeped into my bones. I knew I needed to eat something, so I forced down some crackers, even though my stomach was churning. I huddled on the couch, the fire poker within reach, feeling utterly exhausted. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I fell asleep again, right there on the couch, scared out of my mind. I woke up to a cold cabin, again. I had no idea what time it was. No clocks, and my phone was still dead. And I was freezing. I mean, bone-chillingly cold. I piled on layers of clothes, but it didn't help. Neither did turning up the heat or even getting close to the fireplace. My throat was starting to feel scratchy. Just great. I was getting sick. I tried to take a quick shower, hoping it would warm me up, but the water was barely lukewarm. I felt even colder afterward. My stomach was in knots. I tried to eat some soup, but my body revolted. I ended up back on the couch, buried under blankets, feeling like death warmed over. In just a few short hours, audio journey together, I'd gone from feeling tired to feeling like I was at death's door. And then, I passed out again. When I woke up, everything was a blur. There was a soft knocking sound and a muffled voice. I started to move toward the door. My whole body ached. I didn't even bother to pick up the fire poker. "You knew you need to get out of there," the girl from before whispered. "Come out here. I'll help you." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "Don't lie. I know you have others with you." I croaked, my voice hoarse. "Others? Is that what you saw? You sound awful. Audio journey together. I don't know if you'll last more than a day or so inside there. What was she saying? Was she implying that I was sick because of the cabin? That didn't make sense. She was just trying to lure me out. But a part of me wanted to believe her. I was so scared. I crept to the nearest window and unlocked the shutter, just enough to peek out. The snow outside was blinding. My eyes hurt. When my vision adjusted, I scanned the trees, looking for those things. There were no tracks in the snow. Had I imagined them? Then a dark shape moved in the trees. Audio journey together. Then another. And another. More and more of them, emerging from the forest, like they knew I was watching. Some dragged behind them the carcasses of animals, their mouths stained with blood. I'd be torn to shreds if I went out there. Suddenly, a face appeared right outside the window. A pretty face, red hair, green eyes, a kind smile. The girl. For a second, I wasn't afraid. She looked so normal, so friendly. I almost reached for the latch. Then, her smile started to widen too wide. I slammed the shutter closed and locked it. I didn't know what those things were, or why they hadn't gotten together. I knew gotten in yet, but I knew one thing: I was safe inside. The horrors were out there, and they were staying out there. The girl kept pleading with me to come outside. I tried to ignore her. I was getting worse. Much worse. I could barely stand. I managed to drag myself back to the couch. Fever, I guess. I couldn't think straight. Just before I blacked out, I heard the girl's voice one last time. I'll somehow get you out here. How long was I out? No clue. Time had become this weird, blurry thing. I couldn't move. Every inch of me itched. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sandpaper. Was this it? Was I going to die here, in this creepy cabin, all alone? Ironic, really. I didn't even like cabins. I should have just stayed home and read my books. Then, bent. Audio journey together, a different kind of bang this time. Loader. And was that smoke? I didn't remember adding wood to the fire before I passed out. A jolt of adrenaline, or maybe just pure terror, shot through me, and I managed to stand up. The cabin was filling with smoke. Not just from the fireplace, either. And it was coming through the shutters. The place was on fire. I had to get out. Now, I started coughing, my lungs burning. I stumbled towards the front door, but then my body just stopped. It was like I was a puppet, and someone else was pulling the strings. Audio journey together. I couldn't control my own movements. I heard this groaning sound like the cabin itself was in pain. It almost sounded like a scream. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision as I was forced to watch myself walk away from the door, away from safety. I ended up in the kitchen, and there she was. The girl. It was hard to see her clearly through the thick, choking smoke, but it was definitely her. She was coughing too, her face streaked with soot. Come on, you'll die in here, she yelled, her voice hoarse. She had busted open the back door, our creative audio journey together. A splintered hole where the lock used to be. She was holding a hammer, a big one, the kind you'd use to build a house, not break into one. I took a step towards her, towards the open door and the fresh air, but then my hand, my own damn hand, moved on its own. It grabbed a knife from the counter, a big, sharp chef's knife, and then I lunged at her. She dodged back, but I still managed to slice her across the face, just above her left eye. A deep cut. Blood welled up, dripping onto the floor. And the floor, it just absorbed it, like it was thirsty. No trace left behind. I wanted to scream, to tell her I didn't mean it, that I wasn't in control. But I couldn't. Sorry about this, she said, her voice surprisingly calm, and she raised the hammer. Journeyed together. The last thing I remember before blacking out was a blinding pain in my temple. Then, I woke up again. Freezing, shivering uncontrollably. My throat was raw, and my head was throbbing. But the fever was gone. I felt weak as a kitten, but the intense, burning fever was gone. And I was in my car, creative audio journey together. My own car. The cabin was in front of me, engulfed in flames. A raging inferno against the backdrop of the snowy woods. That same screaming sound was coming from the burning building, and for a split second, I thought I saw a plume of black smoke, darker than the rest. shoot out from the flames and disappear in the trees. I called the police. Just hold on till then, a voice said. I turned my head, slowly, painfully. It was the girl. She was taking off her jacket, a thick down thing, and wrapping it around me. Her left eye was swollen shut. The cut above it caked with dried blood. My fault. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. She held a water bottle to my lips, and I sipped gratefully. I'm sorry, croaked, the words barely a whisper. Don't worry about it. My eye is fine, and I'll have a neat scar, she said, and she actually smiled. A real, genuine smile, despite everything. The cabin. I started, then coughed, my lungs still full of smoke. Yeah, it was draining your life force and stuff like that. I'm glad I got to you in time. You'll recover in a few weeks. Anyway, I gotta go. Later, gay gator, she said. I wanted to ask her a million questions. Who was she? Who was she? What was that place? How did she know what was happening? How do I thank her? But I was too weak, and she was gone, disappearing into the woods as quickly and mysteriously as she had appeared. She clearly didn't want to stick around for when the cops showed up. The next few days were a blur of hospital rooms, concerned doctors, and endless questions from the police. I didn't have many answers. They found the burned out shell of the cabin, but there was no record of it. No owner, no journey together, permits, nothing. The road leading to the cabin vanished, like it had never even existed. The police had a hell of a time finding me through the thick woods. It was like the forest had swallowed the road whole. I told them about the online ad, but there was no charge on my credit card. No record of the website, nothing. And I couldn't find the ad again no matter how hard I looked. They were baffled, frustrated, and eventually they gave up. There were no leads, no evidence, nothing to go on. I took a few weeks off work to recover. Physically, I was getting better. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. But the whole experience, it messed me up. I kept seeing those faces in the windows, hearing that girl's voice, feeling that bone, deep chill. People had started to whisper about disappearances in those woods. Hikers, mostly. And a year ago, they found 2 bodies in the shell of a house that, like the cabin, shouldn't have been there. They were within walking distance of a town. Starved to death, the report said. Why didn't they just walk out? Why did they stay in that house until they died? I needed answers. I needed to thank that girl, that strange, brave girl who had saved my life. I needed to warn people, to tell them that there was something evil lurking in those woods. Something that preyed on the lost and the vulnerable. Something that hid in plain sight. So, yeah, I was a mess. Physically, I was on the mend, but mentally, not so much. I was jumpy, anxious. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the house made me think of that cabin, of those things at the windows. I went back to work eventually. Mark, my boss, was surprisingly understanding. There probably figures who if he wasn't. The new hire, Emily, was actually working out. Thank goodness. At least something was going right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something. That cabin, those creatures, the girl. It all kept swirling around in my head. I started digging, spending my nights scouring the internet for anything that might explain what had happened. Missing person reports, local legends, weird news articles, anything. I found some creepy stuff. More disappearances in that area than you'd expect. Hikers, campers, cardio journey together, even a couple locals who'd lived there their whole lives. And the stories, they were unsettling. People talked about strange lights in the woods, whispers on the wind, a feeling of being watched. Some even mentioned an old, abandoned cabin, creative audio journey together, though the descriptions didn't quite match the one I'd stayed in. Or maybe there were multiple cabins. Maybe that was the key, some kind of network. But one thing kept popping up her, a local legend about a woman, a spirit, some said, who resided in the forest. The stories were different, but always described her as having red hair. Could it be the girl who saved me? Then I found a forum, a weird little corner of the internet where people shared their paranormal experiences. And there it was. A post about a cabin. A cabin ardeur appeared and disappeared. A cabin that lured people in with promises of warmth and shelter, only to trap them inside and drain the life out of them. Other users chimed in, sharing similar different locations, but the same basic idea. A predatory cabin, a Gordio journey together, and some of them mentioned a girl with fire red hair and green eyes who tried to save them. My savior. I had to know more. I had to find her. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back, not to the cabin. It was gone, vanished without a trace. But to the woods. Audio journey together, to the area where it had all happened. It was a long shot, I know. Crazy even. But I couldn't just let it go. I parked at the edge of the forest, where the road used to be, and just walked. I didn't have a plan, really. Just a vague hope that I'd find something, some clue. Some sign of the girl. The woods were different this time, quieter. Still, the feeling of being watched was gone. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. I walked for hours, calling out the girl's name, even though I didn't know it. Stupid, I know. But I had to try, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. I was starting to think that this whole trip was a huge mistake when I saw her. She was standing by a stream, her red hair a splash of color against the muted greens and browns of the forest. She turned when she heard me, and I saw her face, that same kind smile, that same haunted look in her eyes. The scar above her left eye, a thin, white line, was a stark reminder of what she'd done for me. It was a miracle I found her. She could have been anywhere. You came back, she said, her voice soft like the rustling of leaves. I had to, I said, audio journey together, my voice trembling, and I had to know, what was that place? What were those things? She sighed, a long, weary sound. It's a long story, she said, and not a happy one. We sat by the stream and she told me. She told me about the cabin, how it was a creature, creative audio journey together. A predator that fed on life energy, how it lured people in, promising them comfort and safety, only to trap them and drain them dry. She told me about the faces at the windows, the spirits of those who had died there, trapped, unable to move on. She called them the hollowed, and she told me about herself. Her name was Inia, and she wasn't exactly human. Not anymore. She was tied to these woods, to that cabin, in a way she couldn't fully explain. She was a protector of sorts, a guardian, trying to save those who wandered into the cabin's clutches. She had been trying to destroy it for a long time. What didn't you tell the police? I asked. They wouldn't believe me, she said, a sad smile on her face. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, they'd think I was involved. But how to creative audio journey together? I felt it, she said. The cabin, it called to me when it had a victim, and I felt you, your life force, fading away. We talked for hours. She answered my questions as best as she could, but there was still so much she didn't know, or couldn't explain. It was like trying to describe color to someone who'd been born blind. Some things just couldn't be put into words. As the sun began to set, I knew I had to go. I thanked Annie again, and this time, I'm in the bottom of my heart. For will you be okay? I asked. Worried. I'll be fine, she said. This is my burden, but thank you for coming back, for believing me. I left her there, by the stream, a splash of red against the darkening woods. I never saw her again, but sometimes, when I'm feeling lost or alone, I think of her. Inia, the protector of the lost, the journey together, the guardian against the darkness. I still don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. There are things in this world that we can't explain. Dark things, but there is light. 2. There are people, or beings like Enya, who fight against the darkness, even when no one else believes them. Audio journey together. And sometimes, the greatest act of bravery is simply to listen, to believe, to offer a hand in the darkness, even when you're scared out of your mind. Because you never know when you might be the light someone else needs to find their way home. The disappearances in the woods have slowed down. Maybe the cabin is truly gone. Maybe Enya finally found a way to destroy it for good. I hope she did. I hope she is safe. I went back to work and back to my normal life. But I'll never forget my stay in that cabin, and the woman who saved me from a fate worse than death. Begin our narrative audio journey together. Name's Alex, and this whole thing went back in '96. I was just a teenager then, working this gig as a fire lookout in some remote tower up in the Pacific Northwest. The job was pretty much what you'd expect: keep an eye out for any signs of fire, report anything weird, audio journey together, and stay in touch with the other towers in the base. It's the kind of job where you've got tons of time to think. A lot of time to be alone. Isolation is just part of the deal, and back then, before the internet and smartphones were really a thing, that isolation could hit you pretty hard. This story isn't about fires, though. It's about something else, something I still can't really wrap my head around. Most people don't believe me when I tell them, but it happened. I've been carrying it around with me for years now. As time went by, audio journey together, I figured I'd meet someone else who'd believe me, or even better, who'd gone through something similar. That hope's pretty much dried up. Still, I can't shake the feeling that I can't be the only one. Anyway, it all started during my first week up in that fire lookout tower. Let's begin our creative journey together. I'd already gotten into a rhythm, something to fill those long, empty hours. Everywhere the sun would peek through the tower's little windows, and that was my cue to start the day. I'd roll out of my creaky bed and head straight for the tiny kitchen area, audio journey together. I'd boil water on a little stove for my coffee. That smell, it filled up that small space and made it feel a bit more normal, a bit more like home. Then, coffee in hand, I'd climb up to the observation deck. The view from up there was, well, it was something else. Beautiful, yeah, but also kind of intimidating. The forest just stretched out forever in every direction, this huge ocean of trees. My job was to scan that vastness, looking for any hint of smoke or fire. So, I'd grab my binoculars and start my watch. I knew how important my role was. A small fire could turn into a raging inferno if it wasn't caught early. It was a heavy responsibility, but I was up for it. My radio equipment was always there, sitting on a wooden table. That was my lifeline, connecting me to the base and the other lookout towers scattered across the region. Creative audio journey together. Every morning, evening, like clockwork, I'd report in. But on this particular day, that routine took a seriously unsettling turn. After I finished my first sweep of the forest, my eyes caught something that just didn't belong. Out there, at the edge of the tree line, way beyond any hiking trails, were these shadowy figures. They were just standing there, not moving, almost like they were watching the tower. Or watching me. My pulse picked up. This was definitely not something they'd trained me for. I could feel the weight of the binoculars in my hands. Audio journey together. Like I was suddenly seeing things through some kind of hyper-realistic lens. My grip tightened on the radio's microphone as I got ready to report what I was seeing, but I hesitated for a second, doubting myself. Was I just seeing things? But no, when I looked again, the figures were still there. There was no denying it. I pressed the button on the radio, and it crackled to life. My voice came out with this urgency that hadn't been there before. Up until this point, my days in the lookout had been nothing but peaceful. Begin our creative audio journey together. My biggest worry was spotting a wisp of smoke or reporting the occasional lost hiker. But now, these figures, they added this whole new level of tension and unpredictability to the job. I started grappling with questions I'd never even considered before. Was I really alone out here? What were these figures? And why were they just standing there at the edge of the forest? Base, this is Tower 6, do you copy? The radio crackled again, and then I heard my supervisor, Mike's, voice. This is Base, go ahead, Tower 6. I'm seeing some figures at the edge of the forest. Standing still. Not animals. They look human, or at least humanoid over. There was a brief pause before Mike responded. Alex, you're probably just seeing some wildlife or shadows playing tricks on you. Don't worry about it, over. The dismissal in his voice was obvious. but those figures were still there when I looked again. Are you sure, Mike? These are different. They're definitely not animals. Mike's voice had a hint of irritation this time. Alex, it's your first week. You're not used to the woods yet. Things can look weird. Journey together, especially when you're isolated. Keep your focus on spotting fires, over. And that was it. Conversation over. I put down the radio, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what I was seeing was real. I wrote down the time and location of the sighting in my logbook, just in case. After reporting the sighting, I tried to get back to my daily routine, but it was hard to focus. I kept glancing towards the edge of the forest, half expecting the figures to have moved closer. I decided to busy myself with some maintenance work to try and take my mind off things. I swept the floors, cleaned the windows, and even organized the canned food in the pantry by type and expiration date. As I was rearranging the cans, I also took stock of my supplies. I counted the water bottles, batteries, and first aid items, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. It suddenly seemed way more important to know exactly what resources I had. The afternoon dragged on, and it was time for another sweep of the forest. I picked up my binoculars, hesitating for a moment before looking. When I finally focused on the edge of the forest, the figures were gone. Journey together, I felt this mix of relief and unease. Had they retreated, or had they just moved to a spot where I couldn't see them? My radio crackled to life, interrupting my thoughts. It was time for the evening check-in. I reported that everything was normal, even though it really didn't feel that way. Together, the base signed off without any more questions, and I was alone again. As the sun started to set, I heated up some canned soup for dinner. I ate slowly, my eyes drifting towards the windows more often than my food. When I finished eating, I decided it was best to lock up for the night. Audio journey together. I secured the tower door and double-checked the windows. Normally, these tasks felt routine, but tonight, they felt absolutely necessary. I sat down with a book, trying to relax, but the words on the page just didn't register. Let's begin our creative audio journey together. My mind kept drifting back to those shadowy figures, and all the unknowns they brought into my solitary existence. Finally, I put the book down and decided to turn in for the night. I knew sleep wouldn't come easy. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, begin our audio journey together. My ears straining for any sound out of the ordinary. Every creak of the tower, every rustle of the wind through the trees seemed amplified. The next day started like any other. I woke up, made my coffee, and headed up to the observation deck. The forest felt even more endless today. Begin our creative audio journey together, maybe because of the worry I was still carrying from yesterday's strange sighting. I grabbed my binoculars and began my routine scan of the trees. The morning light broke through the foliage, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the ground below. Then there they were, again. Let's begin our audio journey together. This time, they were closer than before, standing within a small clearing that was no more than 200 yards from the tower. As I focused my binoculars, I could make out more details. They appeared humanoid, but were covered in what looked like dark, tattered clothing. Creative audio journey together. Their features were obscured as if they were wrapped in shadow. Despite the morning light, their forms were irregular, shifting, almost like the static on an old television screen. There was a distortion about them that made it hard to focus on any specific features. Already together, it was like my eyes slid off them, refusing to lock on. Gathering my thoughts, I reached for the radio microphone, hesitating for a moment before pressing the transmit button. Tower 4, this is Tower 6, do you copy? I tried to keep my voice steady, disguising the nervous energy that was buzzing inside me. The radio crackled, and then a familiar voice came through. This is Tower 4, I read you Tower 6. What's going on? It was Ben, a guy I'd talked to a few times during check-ins. I paused, considering how to word this. Have you seen anything unusual out there lately? Specifically, shadowy figures at the edge of the forest. The line went silent for a few seconds before Ben responded. Shadowy figures? You mean, like animals? I've seen a couple of deer and a bear, but no shadowy figures. Why? Our creative audio journey together. What are you seeing? I exhaled deeply, a little relieved but also feeling more isolated by his response. I've seen them for 2 days now. They're not animals. They're humanoid, standing at the edge of the forest yesterday, but closer today. About 200 yards from my tower, audio journey together. They're just standing there, watching. Another pause on the line, longer this time. You sure you're not just seeing things? It can get pretty lonely out there, you know. Minds play tricks. I gripped the microphone tightly. I'm not imagining it. I thought so too at first, but they're there. Audio together. Today they're even closer. They don't look like people, not exactly, but they're definitely not animals. They're covered in some kind of dark, tattered clothing, and their features are all blurry, like they're made of static or something. Another pause. This time, when Ben spoke, his voice had a different tone, one I couldn't quite place. Well, I haven't seen anything like, but I'll keep an eye out. Just stay safe, okay? Maybe keep the door locked. I right? I will, I replied, setting down the microphone. His words offered little comfort. In fact, creative audio journey together. They somehow made me feel more alone, the weight of what I was experiencing settling a bit heavier on my shoulders. The next morning, I woke up with this sense of apprehension I just couldn't shake. I couldn't get the conversations and the sightings from the past couple of days out of my head. After brewing my coffee, I climbed up to the observation deck, almost reluctant to pick up the binoculars. When I finally did, my hands were trembling slightly. I immediately looked toward that small clearing where the figures had been yesterday, 200 yards away. My eyes scanned the area, but audio together, there was nothing there. For a moment, relief washed over me. But then, a sudden realization hit me. I hadn't checked the other areas, the areas closer to the tower. My hands moved almost involuntarily, steering the binoculars to scan the surrounding terrain. And there they were. The shadowy figures had moved. Now they were just 100 yards away, closer to one of the footpaths that led toward the tower. They were half hidden by the trees, but definitely nearer. My heart raced as I fumbled for the radio microphone. My fingers pressed the button more hastily than before. Tower 4. This is Tower 6. Do you copy? There was an urgency in my voice that I couldn't suppress. Tower 6. This is Tower 4. What's the situation? The voice crackled through the speaker. They've moved again. Closer this time, just 100 yards away, and near one of the footpaths, I said, trying to keep my voice steady but failing. There was a pause, and the tone that came back was serious and concerned. Are you sure it's not some hikers or hunters? I'm sure, I replied. These aren't people, at least not any kind of people I recognize. Again, of audio journey gear, they're closer and it feels deliberate. Alright, keep your eyes peeled and stay inside after dark. Lock up, and keep a weapon close if you have one, Ben advised. Will do, I responded, placing the microphone back on its holder. As I looked out over the forest, let's begin our creative audio journey together. The shadowy figures seemed to blend in and out of the trees. The curiosity and unease were eating away at me. Just sitting up here, looking through binoculars, didn't seem like enough anymore. I needed to be more proactive, to try to make some sense of what I was seeing. Audio journey together. I grabbed the topographic map of the forest area that was stashed in one of the drawers. It was detailed, showing elevation, trails, water bodies, and other landmarks. Using a red marker, I started placing X on the map, together, each one representing the approximate location where I'd spotted the figures. As I stepped back to get a better view, I hoped that a pattern would emerge, something that would give me a clue as to what these figures might be. Were they following a trail? Were they near water sources? Close to an old, abandoned campsite, perhaps? My eyes darted from one red X to another, but no pattern was evident. Each night, the figures drew unsettlingly closer to my tower. I felt like I couldn't handle this on my own any longer. Feeling desperate for some sort of validation or advice, our creative audio journey together, I grabbed my radio and tuned into Tower 3, where my colleague Sarah worked. This is Alex from Tower 6. Have you ever witnessed anything strange out there? I mean, shadowy figures that seem to be coming closer to the tower each day. There was a pause. Begin our creative audio journey together. A few seconds as of silence that felt like an eternity. Finally, Sarah replied, "I've never seen anything like that. It sounds creepy. Are you sure it's not just the loneliness playing tricks on your mind? Have you been getting enough sleep?" I gripped the radio tighter, together, frustrated but also relieved to be talking to someone. "I know what I saw. I'm not making this up. There's something out there, and whatever it is, it's getting nearer to my tower every single day. I have no idea what to make of it." Just as I heard Sarah key up her radio to respond, the connection dithered. The radio went dead, no static, no interference, just an eerie stillness. My heart skipped a beat. I tapped the microphone, turned the frequency dial back and forth, and even gave the radio a couple of frustrated smacks, hoping to jolt it back to life. Nothing worked. Creative audio journey together. The dead radio intensified the isolation tenfold. It was like being cut off from the world by an invisible hand, left to fend for myself with this inexplicable phenomenon slowly encroaching upon me. Now I was truly alone. With the radio dead, I couldn't warn anyone, couldn't ask for help. Audio journey together. Night descended on the forest, and the darkness felt more oppressive than ever. I could sense the weight of the evening settling around me like a thick blanket, tightening with each passing minute. Gripping my binoculars, I hesitantly scanned the forest below, almost afraid of what I might see. The sinking feeling in my stomach turned into a pit of dread as I found what I was looking for. The figures. They weren't just closer. They were almost right underneath me, nearly at the base of my tower. A shiver crawled up my spine, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. The gravity of the situation hit me hard as I placed the binoculars back on the table. This was no longer a distant curiosity or a vague fret. This was, well, it was terrifying. I started to feel cornered, my options dwindling as the figures drew nearer. Whatever they were, let's begin our creative audio journey together. Whatever they wanted, the risk was now immediate and terrifyingly real. I rushed to take stock of what I had to defend myself: a flashlight with dimming batteries, a basic fire extinguisher, and a flare gun with a single flare. No real weapons. Audio journey together. Nothing that would be considered reliable for self-defense. My eyes darted to the furniture, the chair, the table, the shelves. In a burst of anxious energy, I moved them in front of the entrance, barricading myself in as best as I could. It was a feeble barrier, I knew, but it was all I had. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat there, waiting, listening for any sound that might indicate what was coming next. All I heard was the wind rustling the trees and my own breath, quick and shallow. Time stretched out, our journey together, each second feeling like an eternity as I contemplated what the figures might do and how I could possibly respond with my limited resources. The minutes ticked on, each one stretching into what felt like an hour. The tower creaked, the leaves rustled, and each sound drove my pulse higher. Audio journey together. I felt like a cornered animal, eyes darting to the barricaded door over and over again. I half expected to be flung open, revealing whatever awaited me outside. But that moment didn't come. I could hear my own shallow breaths filling the room, mixing with the sound of my growing anxiety. Journey together. Gathering my courage, I reached for the binoculars again, my hands trembling as I lifted them to my eyes. I looked down to the base of the tower, half hoping, half dreading what I'd see. The figures were still there, as stationary as before. They hadn't advanced, but they hadn't journeyed together, retreated either. They seemed to be waiting. It was as if they were waiting for a specific moment or a sign. The standoff continued, with neither side making a move, and I was left to grapple with the unnerving uncertainty of it all. The tension was unbearable. Audio journey together. My mind raced through different scenarios. What did they want? Why were they here? Why haven't they moved? These questions circled in my head, but there were no answers. As the first rays of dawn cut through the darkness, I watched through my binoculars as the figures began to retreat. Our creative journey together, they moved back into the forest, blending in with the trees until they were swallowed up by the morning mist. Even though the sunlight should have signified safety and warmth, I felt none of it. The chill inside me persisted. I sat back in my chair, begin our audio journey together, trying to collect my thoughts but finding it difficult. My mind was a whirlpool of questions that looped back on themselves, offering no escape or answers. The day dragged on, each hour stretching out as I went through the motions of my duties. I maintained the tower, swept the floors, created a journey together and ate canned food, but it all felt robotic, almost meaningless in the face of the uncertainty that awaited me. Several times, I picked up the radio and tinkered with it in a futile attempt to get it working again, but it remained stubbornly silent. The absence of human contact, creative audio journey together, even just a voice over the radio, felt like a gaping hole in my reality, amplifying my sense of isolation. As the afternoon waned, I found myself glancing more frequently at the descending sun. The bright sky gradually darkened into hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows that stretched across the forest floor. The beauty of the sunset was lost on me today. Instead, its fading light only served as a reminder that another night was approaching. Another night with the figures. Audio together, another night of not knowing what would happen when the world outside my tower plunged into darkness. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as the sun finally set, surrendering the world to the impending night. The night sky was darker than usual, together, like a blanket of darkness had been thrown over the forest. There was no moon tonight, and the stars were hiding, making everything look like a vast void. My eyes had adjusted just enough to see the figures at the base of the tower. They were circling around, staying just out of the range of clear vision. They were close enough to make out, but far, far enough to keep me guessing. My hand rested on the flare gun next to me on the table. Thoughts rushed through my mind, each one grappling with a dilemma. Should I fire the flare gun? Would it drive them away, or would it provoke something I wasn't prepared to handle? Suddenly, my ears picked up a noise that stood out from the background sounds of the forest. It was coming from directly below, at the base of the tower. This wasn't just the wind or some animal passing through. It was a consistent scratching noise. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. Whatever was making that sound was not just wandering around. It was trying to ascend the tower. Creative audio journey together. The realization filled me with a mixture of fear and urgency. Reacting more out of instinct than reasoned thought, I stood up abruptly, the flare gun in my hand. I took a deep breath to steady my shaking hands, aimed the gun skyward, and pulled the trigger. The flare soared high, cutting through the darkness. For a brief moment, the forest was illuminated in an eerie red glow, like a scene from some apocalyptic landscape. As the flare ascended, the scratching sound stopped. The figures recoiled, retreating into the darkness beyond the trees. For a split second, audio journeyed together. The world was silent save for the sound of the flare as it reached the peak of its ascent. It was a momentary victory, but even as the flare began its descent, illuminating a smaller and smaller portion of the forest, the weight of my decision began to sink in. Had I just warded off danger, let's begin our creative audio journey together, or had I escalated a situation I didn't fully understand? I was left with an uneasy feeling, standing in the red glow of the descending flare, pondering the implications of my choice. Suddenly, I noticed the flare's fiery tail ignite a cluster of dry leaves on the ground. My heart sank as I saw a small fire begin to spread. I snapped into action, grabbing the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. I rushed down the stairs, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My hands worked almost on autopilot to remove the barricades I had set up at the entrance. Audio journey together. Ignoring the voice in my head warning me of the dangers outside, I threw open the door and raced down the stairs that wrapped around the tower. My feet pounded the ground as I sprinted towards the small fire. The fire extinguisher felt heavy but manageable as I pulled the pin and aimed it at the base of the flames. With a squeeze of the trigger, the extinguisher discharged, covering the flames in a cloud of foam. The fire sputtered, crackled, and then died, replaced by a cloud of smoke that slowly began to disperse. As the smoke cleared, the gravity of what I'd just done set in. I'd extinguished the fire, yes, but I'd also stepped out of the safety of the tower. My eyes darted around the forest, scanning the darkness for any sign of the shadowy figures. Nothing. They were gone, as if swallowed up by the night itself. While this could have been a relief, it wasn't. It intensified the knot of dread in my stomach. Where did they go? Ardio Jerther, why hadn't they seized the opportunity to approach me when I was most vulnerable? Their absence, rather than reassuring me, raised more unsettling questions. Clutching the now empty fire extinguisher, I hurried back to the tower. Every sound, every snapping twig or rustling leaf, made me jump. Ardio journey together. My nerves were frayed as I locked the door behind me, quickly restoring the barricade with shaky hands. The flare gun lay where I'd left it, and I gripped it tightly, hoping it would provide some sense of comfort. Looking out through the window, the figures were still nowhere to be seen. Ardio journey together, but that didn't alleviate the weight of unease that had settled over me. They were out there, I knew they were. I sat there, flare gun in hand, pondering these troubling thoughts. After a couple of hours, the sun began to rise, journey together, casting its golden light over the trees and filling the sky with shades of orange and pink. Just as the dawn broke, the radio crackled back to life. A voice burst through the static, clear as day. Tower 6, this is base, do you copy? I copy, I responded, touching the radio microphone. You won't believe what happened here last night. I saw those figures again, but they were closer, right at the base of the tower. And the radio went dead. Slow down, Alex. Start from the beginning, they said. I recounted everything, the figures, the scratching at the base, the flare gun, and let's begin our creative journey together in the fire. I had to put the fire out myself. The fire extinguisher is empty, and there's a burned area in the forest. We're sending a rescue team. Sit tight, the voice on the radio confirmed. Within a couple of hours, I heard the distant rumble of an engine growing steadily louder. Together, a sense of relief washed over me as a vehicle finally pulled up near the tower. The rescue team poured out, inspecting the tower and the area around it. When they got to me, I saw their faces change. They could see I was visibly shaken. Are you okay? One of them asked. I've been better, I replied, forcing a weak smile. They found the markings at the base of the tower, exactly where I'd heard the scratching. Claw marks were etched into the wood, confirming that something did try to climb up our Ardio journey together. They also found the remnants of the flare in the extinguished area of the fire. Despite all of this, skepticism clouded their faces as they looked over the evidence. Should be raccoons, or maybe another kind of animal, one team member suggested, examining the claw marks. You think a raccoon fired a flare gun and started a fire? I snapped, frustrated by their disbelief. It's more likely that you're suffering from isolation and stress. Another team member chimed in. These jobs can get to you, especially when you're out here alone. But I know what I saw, I insisted. These weren't animals. They were human-shaped tall figures, just standing there, and they were getting closer each night. Look, Alex, we all get a little stir-crazy out here. It's normal. Begin of Ardio journey together. You said yourself the radio was out. You were cut off, isolated. Maybe your mind was playing tricks on you. The team leader offered, not unkindly. I shook my head in disbelief. It was clear they weren't taking my claims seriously, dismissing my experience as the product of isolation and perhaps even paranoia. As I climbed into the rescue vehicle, my feelings were complicated. On one hand, relief flooded over me. I was finally getting out of this isolated place. On the other hand, journey together, frustration boiled within me like a kettle on a stove. Despite the markings, the charred remnants, and my earnest recounting, they didn't believe me. They attributed my experience to isolation or even paranoia, and that lack of validation infuriated me. The engine roared to life, Ardio journey together, and we started to pull away. I glanced back at the tower as its wooden frame became smaller in the distance. As the vehicle navigated through the uneven forest road, I couldn't help but think about what was left behind the tower, the markings, the unknown figures, Ardio journey together. These weren't just figments of my imagination, they were real. My mind kept replaying the events, and I couldn't escape the nagging thought that maybe the forest was harboring something that it shouldn't. Something inexplicable and unnerving that defied logic and understanding. That feeling stuck with me as we continued to drive away. Years have passed, and the memory of those unexplained figures still haunts me. After much internal debate, I finally decided it was time to visit the tower once more. As I drove toward the forest, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. I parked my car at the edge of the tree line and took a deep breath, steeling myself before I started the familiar hike to the tower. Reaching the base of the tower, it appeared almost exactly as I remembered it, except for the overgrown vines crawling up its sides. No one has used this tower in years, as they stopped using it many years ago. I placed my hand on the wooden railing and started ascending the stairs of the tower. The steps creaked under my weight. Begin our audio journey together, a familiar sound that took me back in time. I could feel the years of disuse in the worn wood, the air thick with dust and lingering memories. As I climbed higher, I remembered the countless times I'd made this same journey. Always with a sense of duty, but never with the apprehension I felt now. Reaching the landing just before the top, I paused for a moment. This was it, the last few steps that led to the observation room. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, and let's begin our creative audio journey thither. I climbed the remaining stairs and found myself standing at the closed door. The paint was peeling, and the metal handle was tarnished, but it was just as I remembered it. My hand hesitated over the doorknob. Finally, mustering the courage, I grasped the handle and turned it. Begin our audio journey together. The door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. As I stepped inside, it was like walking into a time capsule. The same wooden table, the same chairs, even the same old radio set that once connected me to the outside world. A thick layer of dust covered everything, giving the room an air of abandonment. But despite this, it felt like coming back to an old chapter of my life, one that I'd closed but never really forgot. I walked over to the window with my binoculars and looked out, bracing myself for what I might see. But for now, our creative audio journey together. The forest below was serene, gave me no answers, only a reflection of the mysteries I'd lived. My gaze scanned over the area where I'd most often seen those elusive figures. Nothing unusual caught my eye, just the typical sea of green. I was about to turn away when, creative audio journey together. In the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement. Dark shapes lurking in the depths of the forest. My heart leaped into my throat, and I quickly turned the binoculars toward where I thought I saw them. But there was nothing there now. I scanned the area intensely, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Did I really see them, or was my mind playing tricks on me? The question lingered in the air, unanswered. Either way, I decided it was time to go. I put down the binoculars and took one last look at the forest below. Real or not, audio journey together. The figures remained a mystery, a chapter in my life that refused closure. With a heavy heart, I left the observation room, closed the door behind me, and made my way down the tower stairs. I started my walk back to the car. The forest was serene, but the unease still sat heavy in my stomach. Begin our creative audio journey together. As I drove away, the tower grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed entirely by the forest. Though years have passed, the experience remains etched in my memory. No one ever believed my story, dismissing it as a product of isolation and an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw and what I felt. I met Jake shortly after I moved to Seattle in the spring of 2017. It was a fresh start, you know. New city, new me. We used to joke that we should invent some elaborate, rom-com worthy story about how we met, because the truth was just so blah. We met on Tinder, like seemingly everyone else these days. Honestly, saying we hit it off would be the understatement of the century. This guy seemed tailor-made for me. He loved dogs just like me, We were both into the same music, the same art. Obsessed, really. Of course, we had our differences. He was way more into horror movies than I was, for example. And snakes. Snakes. He tried to convince me multiple times that a snake would be a great pet. That was a hard no from me, right from the start. They just give me the major creeps. But honestly, those little disagreements felt like they just added spice to our relationship. You know, we moved fast. Not crazy fast, but definitely faster than I usually did. He just got me. On our third date, I found myself vomiting way more about my ex than I ever intended. I was half expecting him to bolt right then and there. My ex, Mark, wasn't exactly Prince Charming, if you catch my drift. And let's be real, crying on a third date isn't a good look. But Jake, he just reached across the table, took my hand, and said something like, "We've all got baggage. Who hasn't had a messed up ex?" With a wry smile. I felt so seen, so understood. A few months later, we were moving in together. It felt right. Perfect, even. At first, anyway. And even then, the problems were small. Annoying but small. Like, it wasn't long before Jake sat me down to talk to me about how I kept forgetting to do my dishes. I couldn't help but feel a little defensive. I mean, that particular week I'd pulled 2 double shifts back to back. I was barely sleeping, let alone scrubbing plates. Still, I had to admit he wasn't wrong. Then came the whole thing about my clothes. Apparently, they were a bit too revealing, according to Jake. I still felt that little prickle of defensiveness, but he insisted he was just looking out for me. This was my first time living on my own, after all. He had a few more years of experience on me in that department, so I swallowed my pride and agreed. He was just trying to help, right? Just like he was when he pointed out that my friends weren't exactly the best influence, and that going out on weekends wasn't really fair to him. But aside from those little hiccups, our relationship was honestly great. We had tons of happy photos together. He was always posting pictures of us, with these long, romantic captions that just melted my heart. It's silly, I know, but it felt amazing to have someone be so proud to show me off. For our 1-year anniversary, Jake suggested a trip. He said I could pick anywhere, so I suggested this national park I'd always wanted to see, Joshua Tree. We both loved camping and being outdoors, so it seemed like a no-brainer. But when I mentioned it, his face kind of clouded over. That was Sarah's favorite park, he said. Sarah was his ex. The messed up one he'd mentioned way back on our third date. He didn't talk about her much, which was fine by me. I always got the vibe he didn't like to dwell on that part of his life. So, I didn't pry. All I really knew was that she was some kind of biologist and, apparently, certifiably insane. They dated for a couple of years right after she finished college, and then, according to him, she'd just completely lost it. "Never mind," I said quickly, backpedaling. "What about Glacier National Park? I hear it's gorgeous and it's closer." His face relaxed instantly and he smiled. "That's a much better idea," he agreed. "Glacier it is." I was seriously stoked about our trip. I took a whole week off work, which was huge. I poured hours into planning, maybe too many. I wanted it to be perfect, to show Jake how much I appreciated him putting up with me for a whole year. The trip crept closer and closer, and before I knew it, we were loading up his car, the trunk crammed with camping gear and his dog, Bella, panting happily in the back. We lived about a 10-hour drive from Glacier. Not awful, but definitely far enough to justify all the planning I'd done. The drive up was pretty chill for the most part. Except for that one time I forgot to remind Jake to fill up the gas tank. That was a close call, let me tell you. We were in the middle of nowhere. We left super early in the morning. So early, it felt more like the middle of the night, honestly. By the time we rolled into Glacier, the sun was already starting to set, casting these long, golden shadows everywhere. We'd have just enough time to set up camp, I figured. First, we had to check in at the ranger station. Jake did all the talking, while I stood behind him, petting Bella. I mostly tuned into the conversation. It was mostly just the usual park stuff, you know. Rules, regulations, beer safety, blah blah blah. Of course, Jake was chatting up the ranger like they were old buddies. He was always like that, so charismatic. We figured we'd head out here to celebrate. Isn't that right, honey? Jake said, turning to me with a grin. I nodded quickly. Yep. Can't believe it's been a year already, I said, maybe a little too enthusiastically. The ranger, a youngish guy with sandy blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, looked past Jake and met my gaze. That's wonderful. Congratulations, he said. He had kind eyes. You wouldn't happen to have any recommendations for things to do, would you? Jake asked, shifting his weight, so he was standing right in front of me. I almost blurted out that I already had a whole itinerary planned. I'd been working on it for 2 months. But I bit my tongue. Jake had mentioned recently that I could be a little bossy and condescending, and I was really trying to work on that. So, I just turned my attention back to Bella, scratching her behind the ears, while the ranger rattled off some trails and interpretive programs. Eventually, Jake shook his hand, and we headed off to our campsite. I was reading about some trails we could try. I offered as we were setting up the tent. Oh, don't worry about that, Jake said, waving a dismissive hand. I'm sure the ranger just gave us way more in-depth info than whatever you found online. Right. I mumbled, feeling a little deflated. The first night was peaceful. We built a campfire, roasted some marshmallows. At one point, Jake dropped Bella's leash, and she made a beeline for the next campsite over. Luckily, the couple there thought she was just as adorable as we did. Jake, being Jake, invited them over to join us by the fire. I was a little bummed, if I'm honest. I had this whole vision of us getting up early to hit those hikes he'd suggested I plan a few months ago. And it had already been a long day. Still, plans change. The couple, Marie and Michael, were super friendly. They'd been traveling around in their van for the past 6 months, living that van life. You know, I always thought van life sounded amazing. Of course, we have her holding us down, Jake said, laughing and gesturing towards me. It was hard enough to get away from work this week. I agreed, playing along. Well, a week out here is better than nothing, Marie offered with a smile. She had a really warm energy about her. The next day, we headed out on one of the hikes Jake had picked out, getting a bit of a later start, just like I figured we would. It was beautiful, I had to admit. Stunning, really. I started to feel silly for being so controlling about the itinerary. When we got back to camp that night, we had dinner at the little restaurant near the campground, and things felt easy. This was the longest we'd gone in weeks without some kind of argument or me messing something up. After dinner, we stopped by the visitor center to grab some more firewood. When we got back to our site, Marie and Michael came over again. Not to chat this time, though. They had a question for us, or more specifically, for Jake. Michael, trying to keep his voice low, asked Jake if he'd heard anything strange the night before. Apparently Marie had been spooked by something. I figured they were trying not to scare me too, which was kind of silly. We were in the middle of the woods. Weird noises were kind of par for the course, right? Jake and I climbed into our tent that night, and sleep came pretty quickly. We were both exhausted. But it didn't last, at least not for me. I woke up at some point to this weird noise outside. My first thought was that it was just another camper, maybe heading to the bathroom and wandering off the path in the dark. But as I listened closer, the slow, steady rhythm of the sound made me think otherwise. It almost sounded like whatever or whoever was out there was circling the tent. And I say, whatever, because it didn't quite sound like footsteps. It was more like a sliding, like something scraping along the ground. A shiver went down my spine. I looked over at Jake. He was still sound asleep, dead to the world. I swallowed hard. The last thing I wanted to do was wake him up, especially if it turned out to be something as dumb as a deer. Trying to calm my racing heart, I focused on the noise outside. I tried to reason with myself. We were in a legit campground, right? Lots of people around. Rangers just a stone's throw away. Surely, whatever was out there couldn't be that dangerous. Animals wandered into campgrounds all the time. I knew that. But the odds of being attacked by some wild animal less than 50 feet from a ranger station had to be pretty slim, right? Whatever was out there kept circling. I was sure of it now. I heard Bella start to whine. She was awake too, evidently. I looked over at her, trying to make out her small shape in the darkness. I wanted to call her over, away from the tent's entrance. Not that a few extra feet would make much difference if the thing outside was dangerous. Plus, I didn't dare make a sound, terrified of alerting whatever was out there to our presence. Then, the sliding stopped. It sounded like it was right behind the tent, right above where Jake and I were sleeping. I almost screamed when a low hiss reached my ears. That was it for Bella. She completely lost it, barking like crazy, trying to claw her way out of the tent. It was like her first bark broke some kind of spell. Jake shot up, instantly demanding to know what was going on, as Bella tried to claw her way out of the tent. There was a loud crash outside, then silence. What the fuck is going on? Jake demanded, all traces of sleep gone, replaced by anger. I tried to explain what had just happened. The scraping, the circling, the hiss. I was barely halfway through my explanation when he rolled his eyes. It was probably just a deer, he said, like I was an idiot. A deer, it hissed. I said, my voice rising in pitch, any attempt at being quiet forgotten in the face of whatever had been out there moments ago. Deer make weird noises. God, I get the dog freaking out, but you? Jake asked, incredulous. I'm not freaking out, I said, even though I totally was. There was something out there. Michael said Marie heard something too. Mari probably also heard a deer. Jesus Christ, I didn't know I was going on a camping trip with a 12-year-old. Jake said. I felt tears stinging my eyes. Things had just been going so well. Finally. I'm sorry, I mumbled. I just got freaked out, you're right. It was silly. We woke up even later the next morning. Surprise, surprise. My panic from the night before came flooding back. But in the daylight, it was easier to see Jake's side of things. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous to freak out over what was probably just a curious deer. It had sounded like it was sliding, or slithering, or whatever, sure. But what did I really know about wildlife? I shoved those thoughts aside, deciding to focus on the day ahead. Jake and I headed out for the second hike he had planned. A longer one, this time almost 12 miles round trip. I glanced at the time when he mentioned the distance, trying to keep the frown off my face. It seemed a little late in the day to start such a long hike, but Jake assured me it would be fine. We stopped at the ranger station near the campground to use the bathrooms and fill up our water bottles before we set off. The same ranger we'd met a few days before was there again, and once again greeted us with a friendly smile. Bella had apparently chosen this particular outing to be shy, so I ended up holding her leash off to the side while Jake chatted with the ranger and bought some more firewood. What type of dog is that, by the way? The ranger asked as Jake turned to leave. I saw his face instantly light up. Bella was a rare breed, one he'd spent thousands of dollars on and a trip to another country to get. He loved getting to brag about her. A Krumphalander, Jake replied. They're a rare German breed, not many in America. She's very cute, the ranger said. I could tell Jake wanted to keep the conversation going, but another man had walked up, effectively ending our interaction as the ranger turned his attention to the newcomer. We had to drive out of the park to a nearby town to drop Bella off at a kennel Jake had booked for the day, since dogs weren't allowed on most trails. Jake ranted the whole way back to the trailhead about how stupid that rule was. The hike was gorgeous. Seriously, picture postcard perfect. Jake had mentioned that the trail followed a lake for a bit before heading up to the ridge, but apparently his definition of bit was way different from mine. Not that I was complaining. The lake was this insane sapphire blue. It was hard to focus on the scenery, though with this nagging feeling about the time. The sun seemed to be moving way faster than usual. It was probably just my imagination. I felt a chill of anxiety creep down my spine at the thought of being out here after dark. Around 1, about 2 hours in, we stopped for lunch. We'd only been stopped for a few minutes when this guy just appeared. Not on the trail. He literally pushed his way through the thick bushes up ahead. I jumped, a little gasp escaping my lips. The guy just stared at us for a moment. His face was totally blank, unreadable. Then he straightened up. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was weird, raspy, like he hadn't used it in a while, or maybe chain smoked 3 packs a day. Or both. "Afternoon," Jake replied, his eyes narrowed. You two headed past the lake? The guy asked. That was the only place this trail went, so it seemed like a dumb question. But then again, he had just come from off trail, so maybe it wasn't so obvious to him. We are, Jake said, his tone dismissive. I could tell he was just as creeped out as I was and wanted this guy gone. Pretty day for a hike, the guy said. I'd keep an eye on that sun, though. He just kept staring at us. We stared back, not sure what else to say. I looked over at Jake. He was still looking at the new guy, his jaw tight. Well, I'll let you two get on with your lunch, the guy finally said. Then he just walked right past us, heading back down the mountain without another word. As soon as he was out of sight, I broke the silence. What the hell was that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake shrugged. I dunno. Crazy mountain man. Lust crackhead. He's gone now, anyway. I frowned, my gaze lingering on the bend in the trail where the guy had disappeared. Seriously, that didn't creep you out? I asked. I mean, yeah. He was weird, but you're bound to run into weird people sometimes. Jake said with another shrug. I wasn't totally convinced, but I nodded. He was right, I told myself, turning back to my sad, squished sandwich. After lunch, we kept hiking. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Plus, I noticed how few people were on the trail that day. That combined with a weird dude from earlier, and oh yeah, the constant, looming threat of grisly bears, kept my anxiety simmering just below the surface. God, we just had to pick the one hike that no one is on, I thought as we rounded a series of large boulders. By now, the shadows were getting seriously long. We still hadn't reached the ridge. We hadn't even cleared the lake. I felt like we must have been way past the 6 miles it was supposed to take to reach the ridge. I debated whether or not to say something. I decided against it. Jake would just tell me he knew what he was doing, that he was the hiking expert, with tons more experience than me, and all that jazz. So, we kept going. But when the sun started dipping behind the mountains, and we were still nowhere near any kind of ridge, I finally stopped. Maybe we should start heading back, I suggested, gesturing toward the rapidly sinking sun. Jake turned to face me. His face was red and shiny with sweat, the orange glow of the sunset making him look almost demonic. It should be right up here, Jake insisted. Well, do you have the map? I could take a look at it, I offered. Jake rolled his eyes. I know how to read a map, Lisa, he said. He set his bag down, presumably to pull the map out. After a few moments of rustling around, he looked up at me, his expression shifting from annoyance to something colder. Did you take the map? He asked, his voice edged with ice. No, I haven't touched it, I said quickly. It's not there. Why the fuck would I be asking you if you took it if it was here? God, Lisa, you can really be dumb sometimes. Jake gave the backpack a frustrated kick. Sorry, I said, shrinking back. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. We weren't lost, exactly. We were still on the trail. Even if it wasn't the trail that led to the ridge, we could just backtrack. I told Jake as much, the dying sunset adding a sense of urgency to my words. If we hurried, we might be able to get at least partway off the mountain before it got completely dark. Maybe to a more populated section of whatever trail this was. "All right," Jake agreed. "Come on, let's get going." The hike down was tense, to say the least. I could practically feel the anger radiating off Jake, and I didn't dare say anything for fear of making it worse. Despite our best efforts, we weren't even back to our lunch spot when dusk started to turn to full-on darkness, and it became nearly impossible to see. I pulled out my phone. Its flashlight barely cut a few feet ahead through the inky blackness, but it was better than nothing. Jake did the same. I frowned, wishing I'd checked with him to make sure he'd brought a real flashlight. I just assumed that was a given, with all his supposed hiking experience. Oh well, I could hardly judge someone for forgetting something, could I? Our progress was agonizingly slow in the dim light. That, combined with the rocky trail, made every step feel like a potential disaster. And then, it happened. I misjudged a loose rock. It gave way beneath my boot. I yelped as I fell, the cold, hard stones cutting into my skin. My phone hit the ground, the light disappearing. I saw the remaining light spin around. "Jesus Christ, I told you to watch your step," Jake said. I winced. "Sorry," I said. "I just don't want you to get hurt," Jake replied, his voice softening a little. "Are you all right?" He crouched down in front of me, his phone's light shining right in my face. I gave a small nod. "I think so," I said. I raised my hands to examine the damage. Just a few scrapes, nothing serious. That was a relief. It definitely hurt worse than that. I looked back at the ground, scanning for my phone. Thankfully, it had just fallen face down. It seemed to be working fine. Jake helped me to my feet, and we continued on. We hadn't taken more than 3 steps when we heard it. A sharp crack from somewhere in the woods to our right. Both of our heads snapped toward the sound at the same time. I felt my blood run cold. "Please don't be a bear. Please don't be a bear," I prayed silently. "It's probably just a deer," Jake said, but for the first time, I heard a hint of doubt in his voice. "If I get out of this alive, I am never going hiking again," I thought. There was another crack, this time from further up the trail. "We should keep moving," I said, swallowing hard. I tried to remember what you were supposed to do if you encountered a predator. Not be wandering around the woods after dark was probably high on that list. My mind helpfully offered, "Look big. Don't run. Make noise." I forced myself to keep walking, trying to figure out how to do the other 2 things. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to do either of those. I was 5'3" on a good day. Jake was pretty imposing, at least. Did make noise. Mean like sing, yell, bang rocks together. I didn't have time to keep freaking out over the vaguely recalled instructions because something crashed through the bushes right in front of us. Well, I wasn't sure what it was. It was definitely big. Big enough to take up the entire trail. It didn't look like a bear, but in the dim light, I couldn't make out much detail. From what I could see, it almost looked like a fallen log, except it was definitely moving. "Run, Varun," Jake shouted. I just stared, frozen in shock for a split second, as Jake darted off into the woods. He didn't even wait for me to respond after yelling to run, before he took off into the thick trees. I wondered if he had gotten a better look at whatever that thing on the trail was, if that was what had caused him to bolt so quickly. I didn't have much time to think about it, though, as my senses came back to me, and I scrambled after him. Any concern about what we should be doing had vanished, along with any fears of falling. All I could focus on was catching up to Jake and figuring out what the hell had just happened. My throbbing ankle, combined with a shorter stride, meant I couldn't run nearly as fast as Jake, though. Within a few moments, I found myself alone in the dark woods. I forced myself to keep going, realizing at some point that I was screaming Jake's name. It hit me all at once how incredibly stupid this was. We'd just run off the trail, the one source of, well, not exactly safety, but at least a known path. We didn't have a map. We didn't have real flashlights. We didn't even have jackets. And now, of course, there wasn't even a we. I realized, slowing to a stop, gasping for breath. Jake. I shouted between gasps, my hands on my knees. The silence of the forest was my only answer. Had it always been this quiet? I wondered. I could have sworn the woods were alive with crickets and other nocturnal creatures earlier. Now, the darkness surrounding me felt almost thick, like it was some living thing, muffling any sound that tried to reach my ears. Taking another shaky breath, I straightened up, shining my phone's pathetic light around, searching for any sign of Jake. There wasn't any. He probably hadn't even realized I'd fallen behind. I was at a complete loss for what to do next. I realized I wasn't even sure which direction we'd come from. The trees looked the same no matter where I looked. Fuck, I whispered, the word swallowed by the darkness. I looked around again, hoping for something. Anything that might help. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. And then I heard the scream. It sliced through the silence like a knife. I knew instantly who it belonged to. Jake. I shrieked, taking off in the direction the scream had come from. A second scream sounded. It was filled with pure, unadulterated terror. I didn't think I'd ever heard Jake sound afraid like that. Jake, where are you? I shouted, my voice cracking. Stay back. His cry was cut off abruptly, turning into a strangled, choking sound. I had to be close. I swung my light around wildly, trying to catch any sign of movement or color in the darkness. A flash of beige caught my attention. It didn't seem to match the surrounding trees. It had a scaly, almost shiny appearance. And then it was gone. I ran in the direction where it had been anyway, only to find an empty space between two trees. Everything after that is a blur. They say trauma does that. Makes you forget details. Sometimes whole events. I wasn't sure how long I stumbled around out there, still shouting for Jake. Every now and then, I would hear something rustling in the bushes. Every time, my blood would run cold. I'd change direction, trying to move as silently as possible away from the noise, and hoping against all hope that whatever was out there didn't find me. It started to rain at some point. A cold, drenching downpour. It plastered my hair to my face and soaked the thin, long-sleeved t-shirt I was wearing. After what felt like both hours and mere minutes, I saw a light appear in the trees ahead of me. Then voices reached my ears. Faint at first, then loud enough to make out the words. Well, I hope you're feeling better. I'm fine. I think I just ate something that didn't agree with me. A few moments later, I stumbled out of the trees, practically into a gravel parking lot. There were two people standing there, illuminated by the headlights of a truck with a Park Service logo on the side. I shielded my eyes from the sudden brightness. I heard surprised, then relieved murmurs as they noticed me. After that, I remember someone catching me as I collapsed, repeating over and over that there was something out there. I'm pretty sure I wasn't making much sense at that point. One of the rangers, the blonde one we'd met before, ironically enough, hurriedly gave me a blanket and ushered me into the warmth of the truck, while the other radioed the situation in. Apparently, they'd gotten a report of an abandoned car in the parking lot and had come out to investigate. I'd learn later. I'd gotten lucky and stumbled out of the tree line just before they left. Sitting in the warm truck, feeling began to return to both my body and my mind. "Jakey is still out there," I said, my voice weak from a mixture of exhaustion and fear. "You have to go find him." "This Jake was hiking with you?" the other ranger asked. He had dark hair and kind eyes. I nodded. "We got separated." I heard him screaming, "I think there's something out there." It got him. I collapsed into sobs at that point. "All right, it's going to be all right. You're safe now," the darker-haired ranger said. "I'm Ranger Tom Miller. This is Ranger Alex Johnson. What was your name?" "Lisa," I said, trying to take a steadying breath. "Lisa Matthews." "And you were hiking with someone named Jake Daniels?" Tom asked. "My boyfriend," I said. We headed out late, and it got dark so fast, and I should have told him we needed to go back, and then there was something out there." Alex gave me a sympathetic smile, nodding as if to encourage me to keep going. "We heard it first, and then this thing landed in front of the trail. It was too dark to see what it was, and Jake started running, and I tried to follow him, but he was just gone, until I heard him screaming. Oh God, the screams. They were awful. You guys have to go find him. You have to find whatever that thing was. It was following me. Oh my God." I dissolved into sobs again. The rangers exchanged glances, and I realized how insane I must sound, rambling about some vague thing in the forest that had stalked me and attacked my boyfriend. To their credit, neither of them outwardly expressed their doubt. When I finished speaking, Tom nodded. "Okay, we're going to get a search party together for your boyfriend. How about you come back to the station with us? EMTs can check you out, and we can figure out what we're going to do next," Tom said. I gave a small nod through the tears that were still flowing. I just wanted to be away from that forest as soon as humanly possible. The drive back to the ranger station felt surreal, the trees blurring past the truck window in a haze. I winced as my arm bumped into the truck's door while climbing out upon arriving. "You okay?" Alex asked. I nodded quickly. "Did you hurt your arm out there?" "No, it's from something else," I said quietly. I shifted, pulling my sleeve further over the dark bruise on my upper arm. "Okay," he said, looking for a moment like he wanted to question me further. I prayed he wouldn't. For the first time that day, it seemed like my prayers were answered. We headed inside, and by the time I was done answering a barrage of questions and being checked out by the EMTs, the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon. The Rangers had coordinated a search party in surprisingly little time. By the time the sun was fully up, they had already headed out. A ranger named Crystal Hayes was kind enough to keep me company for most of the sleepless morning that followed. I found myself endlessly grateful for that company. I had never really thought about the after in these sorts of situations before. It seemed like stories always ended with being rescued, the aftermath left to some vague, happily ever after footnote. Now that I was living it, I was glad it at least included a mug of coffee, even if it was just instant. "Do you think they'll find him?" I asked between sips, my voice hoarse. Crystal gave me a soft smile, but I saw the doubt flickering in her eyes. "They'll do everything they can. We have some of the best search and rescue rangers in the country," she said. I was silent for a moment, staring into my coffee. When I spoke again, it took me a moment to even realize I was doing so. "It got him? What you thought you saw out there?" Crystal asked gently. "I didn't think I saw it. I don't even know what I saw. But I know there was something out there," I said, my voice trembling. "I sound crazy, don't I?" I added after a minute. Crystal shook her head. "You sound like you went through something very difficult. Sometimes, in those situations, our mind can play tricks on us," she said. "That just seems like a polite way of saying I sound crazy," I said with a humorless laugh. I glanced past her to a photo on her desk. It was a group of smiling people. I recognized 3 of them: Alex, Tom, and Crystal. The other 3 were unfamiliar: a tall man with a cowboy hat, a blonde woman wearing a bright orange tank top, and a redhead with a Medusa tattoo snaking around her upper arm. "Those are the 2 rangers who found me. Are you friends?" I asked, attempting to change the subject, nodding to the figures I recognized in the photo. Thankfully, it seemed to work. Crystal glanced back at the photo. "Alex and Tom. Yeah, they're good guys," she said. "Who are the others?" Truthfully, I didn't really care who the other people in the photo were, but talking about anything, felt preferable to thinking about what was happening, or what had happened out in the woods. Crystal seemed to pick up on that. "Well, the blonde woman, that's Lauren, she's a tour guide. The bearded guy, he's a ranger too, his name's John. And the redhead, she worked here as a biologist." Before she could finish, a man I didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. "Wu found something," he said, his expression grim. "Jake?" I asked, my heart leaping into my throat. He shook his head. "A phone and a backpack. We think there's human blood on it, in the area you were found. We think it might be his. Do you think you'd be able to confirm?" Yeah, I can do that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced over at Crystal. There was something unreadable in his eyes. They took me to see the cell phone. It sat neatly in an evidence bag, a sight that seemed in stark contrast to the rusty brown that covered the now cracked screen. I felt my blood run cold. The bag was in much the same condition. I recognized it as Jake's immediately. It was the one he'd taken with us hiking that day. Now, one of the straps was torn, and the same red that covered the phone speckled the backpack. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I looked at it, somehow knowing that was all they would find of Jake. "I told you it got him," I said, my voice cracking in fear and barely above a whisper. Crystal looked at me sympathetically. Well, it does seem like something happened, she said. But for all we know, he could have just fallen and hurt himself. We might still find him. I glanced back at the bag, doubt filling my mind, and gave an unsteady nod. I didn't have enough energy left to try to convince anyone of a story that sounded crazy even to me. After I confirmed that the phone and backpack were indeed his, Alex and Crystal offered to drive me back over to my campsite. I had called my parents earlier. I hadn't spoken to them in ages, so I can only imagine how it felt to receive a call like this out of the blue. Despite that, they were relieved, both to hear from me and to hear that I was okay. They'd insisted on flying out the next day to bring me back to our home. Home. That was a word that hadn't had a meaning to me for a while. Jake and I's apartment had never really felt like a home, if I was being honest. They weren't the only ones feeling relieved, though. Guilt coursed through me as soon as I realized this. Jake was most likely dead, and I was feeling relieved. How fucked up of a person are you? God, he was right. I am a psycho, I thought bitterly as we drove back to the campground. The two rangers had volunteered on their day off at that to help me pack up the camp and drive me to a nearby hotel that my parents had booked. They insisted it was nothing, but as I stepped out of the truck and looked at the empty tent, that nothing felt like it meant the world. It didn't take long to pack things up, not with 3 people, and 2 with enough experience for at least a dozen. I wondered what I was supposed to do with Jake's things. Crystal left towards the end to use the restroom. Are you okay? Alex asked quietly as she walked away. Yeah, I'll be fine. Jake is the one. No, are you okay? Alex glanced towards my shoulder, the one with the bruise. Fuck. It wasn't what you think, I said, looking down and pulling my cardigan tighter around myself. I don't want to put you on the spot, but someone close to me was in the not so great relationship once, and they used to say the same thing. So, if it was what you think I think, I just wanted to say you're not alone, and things get better. I felt tears pricking my eyes, the little composure I had left crumbling. Thanks, I said quietly. Once Crystal returned, we finished loading my bag into the truck and headed to the hotel. It was a weird feeling, leaving the park in such a different way than I had entered. When we got to the hotel, I checked in, and Crystal and Alex were nice enough to help me unload my things. Once I had brought the last bag in, I took a deep breath. There were countless things to do tomorrow. Talk to the police about Jake's disappearance. Figure out what I was supposed to do with Bella. I figured I had always wanted a dog of my own. Meet my parents. Say thank you to the old man that had mentioned he'd seen 2 people headed up on the trail late. It had turned out the guy I'd thought was the reason the creep had parking lot. When I finally found my jurors where had been the parkingly found way trilling, had the partner ranger from the treeling. Despite that, I figured I would have trouble sleeping that night. My mind was alive with racing thoughts, pieces and snippets of the past 24 hours slowly forming into some sort of picture. It wasn't until Crystal and Alex were heading out that I was handed, literally, the piece of that picture that made it all click into place. Thank you both. I really appreciate it, I said, standing at the door of the hotel room. Of course. We're sorry about your boyfriend. We still haven't given up hope of finding him, Crystal said. I didn't correct her to say that I had. I wasn't sure how I felt so certain, but I knew whatever was out there had made sure he wouldn't be coming back. We'll do everything we can, Alex said. He paused. Oh, I almost forgot. I picked this up at the campsite earlier. Thought it might be yours. He pulled a map from his jacket pocket, handing it to me. I froze when I saw it. It wasn't just any map. It was the map. The one Jake had sworn he'd put in his backpack. The one I'd seen him put in his backpack. The one we'd been unable to find that evening. You found this at the campsite? I asked, slowly taking the map from him. He nodded. We're exactly. He gave me a quizzical look, as if he wasn't sure why it mattered. In the tent, by Jake's stuff. I had packed up Jake's stuff, and not only was I sure the map was in his backpack when we left for the hike, I was sure I would have seen it with his stuff. That wasn't possible, but what it implied seemed even less possible. I hesitated. I thought back to Jake and I's first in-person date. It had been during the height of the pandemic, so it was hard to meet up at first. When we finally did, we went to the zoo. He was so charming, so kind that day. I wished he had stayed that way. I thought of the countless arguments, the way I watched myself turn into someone I didn't recognize, the way he had hurt me, the nights I had spent crying. I took a deep breath. You know, I think you were right. What you said about trauma making people see things, I said to Crystal. I'm not sure what happened after Jake and I were separated. I'm not sure I actually even heard him yelling. I looked over at Alex. I hope your friend is doing better, by the way. She is now, and I think you will be eventually too. I gave a small nod. Maybe. Well, thank you again. For everything, I said after a moment. Have a good night, he said. I closed the door, feeling like I was also opening one to another chance at life, to healing, to freedom. I wouldn't have thought it started with an empty hotel room, but I guess life always has a way of twisting around itself, like a winding serpent. It's been years since Jake went missing now. As I guessed, he was never found, and eventually the search died down, relegating his disappearance to an occasional footnote in stories about tragic things that happened in the park. There's some speculation it might have been a bear attack. Nothing else was ever found to confirm one way or another, though. Bella is sitting on my lap as I write this. We both have an apartment in my home city now. I haven't been back to the park. Not out of fear, though. It just feels like a chapter that's closed, you know. Maybe snakes aren't so bad after all.
Jardio together. Okay, so here's the deal. My daughter Emily has always been nuts about bugs. All kinds. Ever since she was little, she'd be out there catching them, keeping them in this terrarium I got her when she was 6. It was always changing, too. When she was a kid, begin our audio journey, it was all ladybugs and caterpillars. Now that she's a teenager, she's into the weirder stuff, like praying mantises and stick insects. Honestly, most of the time, I think she gets along better with them than with me or her friends at school. Not that she has many. It's not like she gets bullied or anything. She just kind of keeps to herself.
I guess that's probably my fault though. See, her mom, Sarah, died giving birth to my son Tom, and he was stillborn. I adopted Emily after that, and I never really pushed her into doing anything girly. So, begin our creative audio journey together, or going in the woods and collecting bugs, never seemed that weird to me. What did seem weird, though, was that her terrarium was empty right now. I found this shoebox and asked her about it, and all she said was that she was working on a project. And, like she reminded me, creative audio journey together. They don't have cocoons, they have uthika. It was something that kind of looked like a cocoon, but sounded more like something out of a Dr. Seuss book than a real thing. Still, out of all the bugs she's found, mentizes are the ones that kind of freak me out the most. The wave audio journey together, the way they stand there, with those claws in the air. Emily and I watched one on the front porch once, just frozen waiting for something to walk by. She said they ate other bugs and sometimes each other. I asked her why they'd eat each other, and without missing a beat, audio journey together. She says that sometimes the bigger females will eat the smaller males after mating, or if he's unlucky, sometimes before, leaving nothing but wings and a few legs behind. That's about when I stopped asking her so many questions about insects. Anyway, even though the shoebox thing was odd, 80 of audio journey together, I didn't think too much about it. You see, what I was really focused on was the annual town chili cook-off. To close out the summer, our little town puts on this big fall festival. Besides cider, donuts, and local bands that never really made it big, we have a chili cook-off, creative audio journey together. I knew this year was my year. I'd never even placed before, but this year I had a recipe that I was sure was going to blow everyone away. I especially wanted to beat out Hank Peterson, if nothing else. Hank usually won first place, but he got knocked off his high horse last year, creative audio journey together. And he spent every waking moment since then telling the winner, Maggie Nelson, that she cheated. He tried to play it off like he was joking, but everyone knew he was just being a sore loser and a jerk about it. So, every night, I'd be in the kitchen, working on my secret recipe, trying to make it perfect. Meanwhile, life in the house went on as usual. Emily would be taking her little trips out into the woods, collecting and cataloging all her little specimens. Thing is, she'd come in pretty late at night, usually around dinner time, and except for that shoebox journey together, I didn't really see her doing much of anything else. I wasn't a complete idiot. I figured there was more to it than she was letting on. But hey, at least studying bugs was a better hobby than smoking weed and skateboarding around town, like most of the other teenagers around here. But I couldn't shake this feeling that she had maybe met someone, and she just didn't want me to know who it was. She probably thought I wouldn't approve, but honestly, her hanging out with anyone was a step up in my book. The day of the festival finally rolled around, and I was feeling good. I was sure my chili was a winner. Hank wouldn't even know what hit him. I got up before the sun, only to find Emily already awake. Now that was weird. She barely ever got up on her own, unless I went in there and dragged her out of bed. She was sitting at the kitchen table, that shoebox right next to her. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Just wanted to tell you your chili smells amazing. You should make sure you have some later." I was pretty surprised she even cared, but it was nice to hear. But honestly, over, after tasting my own chili so much while I was working on it, I was kind of sick of the stuff. I didn't tell her that, of course. I just thanked her. Then, get this, she asked me to give her a ride to the festival. I didn't even know she was planning on going. I was so happy. I think I even forgot to buckle my seatbelt on the way there. I was one of the first ones to set up in the tent. More and more people started shuffling in, setting up their own chili stations. Hank and Maggie were two of the last to arrive, creative audio journey together, and they gave each other these dirty looks as they set up on opposite sides of the tent. I was just happy to see Emily come in right when they opened the tent up to everyone. She came over to my station, smiling, and said, "I think the competition is going to be really fun this year. Party together. I'm really rooting for you." That shoebox was still under her arm, and then she started going around to all the other tables. I was a little worried she'd ruin her appetite, tasting everyone else's chili. But again, just the anarchio journey to fact that she was there made me feel like I was on top of my game. As the day went on, it seemed like the whole town came through. Most people complimented my chili, but when the judges came by, they all had their serious poker faces on. I couldn't tell how I was doing. Let's give audio journey together. But I crossed my fingers and hoped for the best. I just hoped nobody noticed that I snuck out to grab a couple of hot dogs from one of the food trucks outside for lunch. They were some kind of teriyaki Korean barbecue things. I really wish I'd thought of that. They were pretty tasty. Finally, Arnie together. The time came for the judges to announce the winners. They stood up near the entrance flap, and the announcer called out third place at Maggie Nelson. There was a decent round of applause, and she went up to get her little trophy, smiling. Then, second place at me. More applause, and I raised my arms like a champ. But even as I was grinning and accepting my little silver cup, I felt a twinge of disappointment. I had a pretty good idea who had won first place, and I was right. Hank had won his crown back. Arnie together. He acted exactly how you'd expect a 5-time champ with 0 class to act. He was yelling like he was so surprised, high-fiving everyone, even if they didn't have their hands up. He grabbed his gold trophy, cleared his throat, and started giving his victory speech, audio journey together. It sounded like he'd been practicing it in front of a mirror all night. He got about 3 lines in when he cleared his throat again. He got one more line out before he started coughing, a really nasty hacking cough. Then he made this awful gagging sound. Our creative audio journey together, like his chili was trying to come back up. It would have been hilarious except that everyone else in the tent, except me, started doing the same thing. Hank was clutching at his throat, retching, and I could see something was really wrong with his throat. It was all swollen, audio journey together, turning bright red. His whole face, actually, was turning this awful shade of crimson. I looked around for help, but even the EMTs who were there in the tent were grabbing their throats, falling tongue to the ground. I ran over to Hank and, thinking he was choking, I got behind him to do the Heimlich maneuver. I gave one quick thrust, and that was the worst thing I could have possibly done. I felt something underneath Hank's skin, down by his stomach, squirming and wriggling, and when I pushed on him like that, it all just forced its way up. This wave of green together. Things poured out of his mouth, and then his nose, and then his throat just split open, like a sausage casing that had been squeezed too hard. And that green wave, I saw, started writhing on the ground, a thick, moving mass. I stumbled back from Hank as his body fell to the ground, and more of those green things pushed their way out of his throat, his mouth, and then, to my absolute horror, his eyes. I looked around the tent, and the same thing was happening to everyone else. These green insects were forcing their way out of every hole they could find, and when they couldn't, they just made their own. Soon, the whole tent was covered in them, covered in tiny praying mantises, and then they started to feed on everyone they'd landed on, if any together, if they hadn't already pushed their way out of the went for first. They even swat coming for me. That started for me. A few landed on my arms and started biting. I brushed them off, and I could hear them crunching under my feet as I ran over and stomped on as many as I could, audio journey together, trying to get out of that house of horrors. I ran out of the tent and into the open festival, gagging, wishing I'd eaten something so I could throw up. Instead, I saw people screaming as several folks out in the festival were also covered in those damn mantises. I looked around for Emily, remembering how she'd been in the tent so early. I wanted to make sure she was okay, but I couldn't find her. Even as more and more people started coughing up those little monsters, she was nowhere to be found. I tried calling her phone. No answer. Then, I heard this weird noise, journey together. It was far off. A high-pitched whistling sound, like an emergency broadcast made with a broken dog whistle. A loud humming noise came from all around, and I had to duck as every single mantis in the place swarmed out of the tent and away from the bodies. They scratched me as they flew past, and then, just like that, they were gone. I got up and saw the insect cloud flying off to the west. I didn't waste any time. I ran as fast as I could to my car to chase that cloud. I didn't know what I thought I was going to do, our creative audio journey together, especially since I got such start trying to catch up to it, but I finally saw where it started to break up. I pulled my car up in my driveway, just as I saw the last bit of that cloud disappear into the woods behind my house. Weeks later, in our creative audio journey together, the police sent me this video someone took on their phone. It showed Emily pulling something out of that shoebox and dropping it into a pot of chili at the cook-off. I can't say I was surprised when I saw it. I also wasn't surprised when some big shot entomologist said that those things weren't pure mantises because mantis nymphs can't fly. I can also say they'll never catch Emily, because what I found in those woods, I haven't told anyone about until now. In the woods, audio journey together, I came to this clearing. There were still a few mantises fluttering around, but thankfully they left me alone. I saw all these markings carved into the trees. Some of them looked like they'd been there for years. There were these weird shapes, like some kind of ancient language, creative audio journey together, and pictures of an insect. It kind of looked like a mantis, but I could see it had fingers, like a person. When there were words I could read, I kept seeing the phrase, he who prays, written all over the place. It looked like this thing was worshipped like a god or some kind of leader. It was all in Emily's handwriting. There were other phrases too. Coming of age, was there a lot, and the return. And then I saw a trail leading deeper into the woods. I started to find clothes along the path. I picked them up. It was the clothes Emily had been wearing that day, audioni together. They led to this big, brown thing tree. Attached to a tree looked like a sleeping bag, but way bigger, with a huge hole ripped in the middle, like something had torn its way out from the inside. There was this disgusting, goo stuff dripping out of it. But there was something else inside, something brittle. I pulled it out. It was a skin, a shed skin like a snake. But it wasn't a snake's skin. It was a human skin, Emily's. But there was more. I followed this trail of weird footprints to another small clearing. And that's when I went to go get a lighter and some gasoline to burn everything in those unholy abominations of those clearings. In that clearing, there was the biggest set of wings I had ever seen, along with several pairs of unnaturally large insect legs. They all looked like they had been chewed. One. Audio journey together. I moved into this house in the middle of nowhere about a year before things started getting weird. I'm talking way out in the boonies, surrounded by woods. I wanted peace and quiet, and for a while, that's exactly what I got. Then came the knocking. It wasn't an everyday thing. Begin our creative audio journey together, more like once every 6 to 8 weeks. Just 1 or 2 knocks, always coming from the woods behind my place. I could never get a good look at what was making them. Whenever I'd try to sneak a peek, it was always hidden behind trees or something. All I could tell was it was big, dark, and seemed to stand upright. I nicknamed it a person. I knew it because it made this bizarre call that sounded just like that, a long, drawn-out hoot-ooey. Honestly, I heard the hooping way more than the knocking. I'd always try to hoop back, like a moron, audio journey together, but I never got a response. Now I know what you're probably thinking: Bigfoot, aliens, some government experiment gone wrong. Look, before all this, I didn't give a rat's ass about any of that stuff. And I still don't even know what hooey is because I never got a clear visual together. If anything like that was real, I figured it just made the world a little more interesting. I came out here to live the simple life, off the grid. No drama, no spotlight. I figured hooey wanted the same. As long as we both stayed in our lanes, I thought we could be cool, journey together. But then my garden and my animal pen started getting raided at night. Not all the time, but every now and then. Something would tear through my veggies, strip my fruit trees, and even snatch one of my chickens or goats. I built those pens to keep out everything from raccoons to bears, and they'd never been breached before. Whatever was getting in was strong and smart. It didn't take a genius to figure out it was probably Hui. I set up some trail cams, hoping to catch a picture and maybe scare it off. It seemed to work at first, together, but then Hui figured out how to avoid the cameras. Or, if it couldn't, it just smashed them or knocked them down. After this happened a few more times, it hit me. Hui only showed up on the same days I heard the knocking. Once I made that connection, I started paying closer attention to its little midnight raids, and I noticed another pattern. It always hit either the garden or the animal pens, never both in one night. Then I lined up the number of knocks with what it stole that night. 1 knock, garden raid. 2 knocks, let's begin our audio journey together. It was going for the livestock. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. The knocks had to be some kind of signal, like it was telling me it was hungry and whether it wanted meat or veggies. The next time I heard the knocking, I decided to test my theory. It was one loud knock, right around dusk, and then, about 15 minutes later, a quick hooey. 1 knock meant a veggie craving, right? So I filled a bowl with fruits, vegetables, some grains and nuts, and put it on this big, flat rock about 20 yards into the woods. I was hoping it would be like, okay, she gets it, and it would leave my garden alone. And guess what? It worked. My garden was untouched the next morning, and the bowl on the rock was licked clean. This became my new routine. Hear a knock, leave an offering. Worked like a charm every time. Then, a few months later, my boyfriend, audio journey together, Ethan, moved in, and just like that, the knocking stopped. We're talking 5 or 6 months of complete silence. I figured Hui had moved on to greener pastures. I told Ethan all about the knocking and the offerings I'd been leaving. Of course, he thought I was nuts. And with no sign of Hui for months after he moved in, it was hard not to feel a little crazy. But then, one evening, it started again. I was out on the back patio, admiring this necklace Ethan had given me earlier that day. It was gorgeous, a silver chain with a delicate, heart-shaped diamond charm. The diamond was this really unique, pale pink color with a thin gold border, and it was catching the last rays of the sunset, sparkling like crazy. The knock, then I heard it. The loud and clear, probably no more than 50 feet into the tree line. Audio journey together. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I should have bailed to hear from Hui again, but something about these knocks fed off. There were three deep hollow booms. The first 2 were practically on top of each other, but the third one came a few seconds later, which really threw me, corny together. Hui had never knocked 3 times before. What the hell did 3 mean? Figuring I should cover all my bases, I put out a whole buffet on the offering rock, fruits, veggies, even some leftover fish, some sweets, just a random mix of stuff. Audio journey together. Ethan didn't hear the knocks, but he went along with it, even though he made sure to tell me again how crazy he thought I was. Next morning, everything looked normal. Garden was fine, animals were all there. I thought the offering had worked, but I was wrong. When I stepped outside, I saw something on the patio. A clump of dark, coarse hair, all matted and tangled. I also noticed that it had a streak of pink. I bent down to pick it up, but then I dropped it and stumbled back inside, almost falling. It wasn't just hair. It was a whole chunk of someone's scalp. Audio journey together. I stumbled into the living room, freaking out, and practically fell on the floor. All I could do was point at the back door and babble like an idiot. There. Out there, the patio. There's something. I couldn't even form a coherent sentence. Hair. The journey together. The hair. Ethan looked more confused than worried, which in hindsight makes me sick. He helped me onto the couch and said he'd check it out, but he wanted me to stay put. I heard him open the kitchen door and step outside. He was out there for what felt like an eternity, buddy together. It was probably only 5 minutes. When I heard him come back inside, I felt this wave of relief, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. "There's nothing out there, Clara," he said, walking back into the living room. "What exactly did you see?" He called me Clara. "Let's begin our creative audio journey." That here's the thing, even though he said there were things, his face was completely white, like he'd seen a ghost. He looked terrified. Seeing him like that made me feel even worse for scaring him, but I knew what I saw. Ethan. When I went outside, there was a clump of hair. "On the patio," I said, still shaking. "Not just hair, but a whole human scalp. It had to have been placed there by something." I suggested calling the cops, but Ethan shot that down immediately. "And tell them what? Journey together. That the thing that lives in the woods put a human scalp on your patio and then took it back?" He asked, and yeah, there was definitely some sarcasm in his voice. "Even if they don't think you're a complete lunatic, they can't do anything without proof. And according to you, together, it's gone." Ethan had some issues with the law, so his reluctance wasn't out of left field, but he had a point. Still, I was freaking out. I went back outside with him to look around, but there was no sign of the scalp. It was gone. And let's begin our creative audio journey together. And there was only one thing around here that could move that fast and that quietly. The thought of it being that close to the house without me knowing. It still gives me nightmares. I checked the offering rock, and nothing was touched. Not a single thing was gone. Audio journey together. That made me even more uneasy. Ethan tried to convince me that I must have seen something else, maybe an animal, but I knew what I saw. He eventually managed to get me to take a nap. When I woke up, it was getting dark. I felt a little calmer, but I was still on edge. The house felt weird, too. Journey together. Empty. I called for Ethan, but he didn't answer. I went downstairs and found a note from him in the kitchen. It said he had to make an emergency delivery for work, and he'd be gone for a few days. Ethan was a long-haul trucker, so last-minute jobs weren't that unusual. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. That wasn't unusual either, since the cell service out here was crap. Still, here I was, completely alone in this house, and being alone was the last thing I wanted. I thought about leaving, but it was already dark. Audio journey together. And I didn't even feel safe stepping outside my own front door. Before I went to bed, I turned on every single light in the house and made sure every door and window was locked. Somehow I made it through the night without anything happening. The next couple of days were uneventful. Audio journey together, but I still couldn't reach Ethan. Every time I called, straight to voicemail. And even though he said he didn't find anything on the patio, the look on his face that morning told a different story. I started to think that maybe he did see the scalp, maybe even saw Huey, Warnie together, and it scared him so bad that he just took off. But most of his stuff was still here, and it wasn't like him to just disappear like that. So, naturally, I started to assume the worst. While I was losing my mind trying to figure out where Ethan went, audio journey together, I couldn't stop thinking about Huey's gruesome little gift, and then, a few days later, I got my answer. The cops showed up one morning and said they needed to use my backyard to get to a crime scene in the woods. Turns out, let's begin our creative audio journey together. Some hikers found 5 bodies at the bottom of a ravine about a mile from my house. The cops said the bodies had been buried, but something big had dug them up. And not only dug them up, but it had also eaten parts of them and ripped them apart. I was sure it was Huey, and my suspicions were confirmed when I saw a picture of one of the victims. Her name was Heather. She had been missing for about 2 months. She was pretty, with these bright green eyes and dark brown hair, with a very noticeable pink streak. That scalp I found, it was hers. But then, 8 of audio journey together, things took an even darker turn. Even though the bodies were in bad shape, they managed to identify all 5 victims. They were mostly, the type you hear about: prostitutes, drug addicts, drifters, people who wouldn't be immediately missed. Creative audio journey together. They were all from different parts of the country, and none of them had any connection to our town or anywhere nearby. The autopsies showed they all died from being strangled and beaten, which in my mind still pointed to Hui. There had to be some kind of connection, audio journey together. Something that explained why these people end up here of all places. And I found that connection when I saw a picture of another one of the victims. When I saw it, I almost fainted. This woman in the picture, she was wearing a necklace, a silver chain with a heart-shaped, light pink diamond with a gold border. The same necklace Ethan gave me. It wasn't Hui who killed those people. It was Ethan. I went straight to the police and told them about the necklace. Said, but I left out the whole scalp thing. Who would believe that? Journey together. They searched my house and found a stash of stuff that belonged to the victims. The cops said they were probably trophies Ethan kept, like souvenirs to remember his kills. I never heard from Ethan again. He's still out there somewhere. The detectives think he might be responsible for other missing persons and unsolved murders in places along his trucking route. They're still investigating. Once I put all the pieces together, it was like a scene from a horror movie. Ethan, my boyfriend, the guy I was living with, audio journey together, had killed those 5 people. He must have met them on the road, brought their bodies back here, and buried them. I don't know if he kept them alive for a while before he killed them, or if he did it right away and just drove around with their bodies in his truck. Both options are equally horrifying. Thinking back to the day he left, I'm pretty sure he did see the scalp and got rid of it himself when he realized it came from one of his victims. He ran, all right, but not because he was scared of Hui. He ran because he was scared of getting caught. Let's begin our audio journey together. Hui was just the thing that made him slip up, but not because it was trying to warn me or protect me. It was just hungry. Hui must have stumbled across Ethan's little graveyard on its own, or maybe it followed him one time when he was burying a body. That's when I finally understood what 3 knocks meant. It meant it was hungry for human meat. After eating those bodies, Hui must have developed a taste for it. And here's why I'm sure of that. Last weekend, a solo camper went missing in the same stretch of woods behind my house. And on the same night she disappeared. I heard 3 loud knocks coming from the woods. 3 knocks. And now, when I'm alone in my house at night and think I see a big, dark figure way out on the edge of my property, I don't know which is worse, that I'm right or that I'm wrong. Audio together. I gotta get this off my chest. I made this account, and I'm posting this because I'm seriously freaked out and I don't know what to do. I mean, I kinda know what I should do, but it's complicated. See, my family, and I mean everyone, brothers, sisters, cousins, grandparents, the whole shebang, we've always been super into the outdoors. Hiking, hunting, fishing, camping, kayaking, you name it, we've done it. Especially winter stuff like cross-country skiing and snowshoeing. I used to love it. Honestly. Of course, journey together, when you spend that much time out in the wilderness, you're bound to see or hear some weird stuff. Animals can spook you, and sometimes your brain just plays tricks on you. I've always been a skeptic, you know. Never believed in ghosts or aliens or Bigfoot or any of that crazy stuff. Aren't we a journey together? I always figured it was just people's imaginations running wild. But this is different. This is my imagination. I saw it. Maybe only once, maybe twice clear as day, but I know it's been following me. This last time was just the final straw. Audio journey together. The thing that made me realize I wasn't just being paranoid. So, when did this all start? To be honest, it's hard to say. I've had weird feelings in the woods for as long as I can remember, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. But I don't know which of those times were real, and which were just me being a kid with an overactive imagination. But the last 5 years or so, things have gotten intense, way more frequent, and that's when I really started to get worried. Like I said, weird stuff happens in the woods. Audio journey together. I always used to brush it off, but these last 5 years it's different. I'll give you a few examples. I don't want to get too specific about locations and stuff, but my wife, Sarah, and I live in Montana, and we do our outdoorsy stuff all around here. sometimes even up in Alberta or BC. My uncle, let's call him Uncle Rick, has this cabin up in the mountains here in Montana. It's kind of a family tradition to go up there. We hike snowshoe, or just chill out and enjoy the peace and quiet. This one time it was late fall, early winter, and me, Sarah, and my girlfriend at the time, my sister, Amy, and her husband, Ben, decided to spend a long weekend at the cabin. We figured we'd hit some trails before the snow got too deep. We got there on Friday, unloaded all our stuff, and just hung out. There was a little bit of snow, but nothing crazy. We had a fire, roasted some marshmallows, just your typical camping stuff. No big deal. But the next day, that's when things started to change. We were pretty lazy that morning. Cooked breakfast inside, played some board games, and journeyed together. It wasn't until like 2 or 3 in the afternoon that we decided to finally go for a hike. We knew we only had a few hours before it got dark, so we set off down one of the trails near the cabin. It was actually really nice at first. The air was crisp, there was a nice breeze, and the scenery was beautiful. Some of the leaves were still changing even. We were messing around, having snowball fights, just enjoying ourselves. The trail was surprisingly well maintained, even though it didn't seem like many people used it. As it started getting close to sunset, journey together, we turned around and headed back. For some reason, I started lagging behind the others. Sarah was walking with Amy and Ben, and they were all talking about something. I just kind of hung back, maybe 30 feet behind them, hands in my pockets, looking at the trees. That's when things started to feel off. The sounds of the woods seemed to fade, like it wasn't completely silent, but it was noticeably quieter than it had been. I was kind of intrigued, so I slowed down even more. Big mistake. The quiet got deeper, and then, all of a sudden, cardio together. It was like someone had hit the mute button. Dead silence, no wind, no animals, nothing. And the air of it felt heavy, like it was harder to breathe. I was freaked out. I'd never felt anything like that before. It's such a cliché, but I swear I felt like I was being watched. Journey together. I got chills on the back of my neck, like some kind of primal instinct was telling me something was behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks. I don't know if it was fear or what, but I just froze. Then, something broke the silence. It was just a little rustling, behind me and to the right, like a pine cone had fallen or something. But from that same direction, I heard a voice. It was weird though. It sounded artificial, I guess. Like one of those text-to-speech things, or an AI trying to sound human. I couldn't even make out what it was saying, but it sounded female. Anyway, audio journey together. I didn't stick around to analyze it. I took off running to catch up with the others. My fight, or flight response, went into overdrive. I was seriously disturbed, and I couldn't even explain why. I just wanted to get out of there. When I caught up with Amy, Ben, and Sarah, audio journey together, they hadn't noticed anything weird, and I didn't want to look like a wimp, so I didn't say anything. But on the way back to the cabin, I made sure to stay close to them, and in front of them if I could. I was seriously shaken up. Was it an animal? A bear maybe? I had no idea. Already journeyed together. But as we got back to the cabin, I started to calm down a little. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. The sun was setting, and it looked like it might snow, so we settled in for the night. I didn't say a word about what happened. Audio journey together. But that night just made things worse. It must have been around midnight or 1 a.m., and it was snowing pretty hard. I was the only one awake, lying in my cot by the window. I was kind of worried about the snow, hoping we'd still be able to drive out in the morning. Audio journey together. But as I was watching the snow fall, that feeling came back. That feeling of being watched. About 20 yards from the window was where the trees started, and in the dim light, I could see the branches moving. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I could definitely sense a presence there, party together. After what happened earlier, I was on edge. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I watched that part of the tree line for at least 20 minutes after the movement stopped, and eventually, as my eyes adjusted, I started to make out some details. Eyes. I saw eyes. Two of them, reflecting audio journey together, little light their watts. And they were staring right at my window. Unblinking. I must have stared at those eyes for the whole 20 minutes, and I kept staring at them for another 5 seconds before I finally turned away, my heart pounding in my chest. Our Yardy didn't know what to get to do. I didn't want to get up and move. I was terrified. I didn't want it, whatever it was, to know I'd seen it. So, I just lay there. And that's what I did for the rest of the night. I couldn't sleep, knowing I was being watched, journey together. I was on edge the whole time. I didn't dare turn back over to see if what I had seen was real. I just froze there until morning. First thing the next day, I suggested we head out early because of the snow, which was partly true, but you know the real reason. We packed up the cars, creative audio journey together, and as we were loading up, I went to check out the tree line outside my window. I had to know. The snow had covered up a lot, but I definitely found some footprints. Bipedal footprints. But because of the snow, I couldn't make out any details. All I wanted to do was get the hell out of there, audio journey together, and that was just the beginning. After that, things only got worse. I became super paranoid whenever I was out in the woods. After that whole nightmare at Uncle Rick's cabin, I was a mess. Every time I went out into the woods, I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, audio journey together. I had a few more close calls after that, you know, that feeling of being watched, the weird silence, that heavy feeling in the air, but nothing as intense as what happened at the cabin. But my senses were on high alert whenever I was out hiking or camping. Together. Part of me still tried to tell myself it was all in my head. But with every creepy experience, that little voice of doubt got quieter and quieter. This next story happened about 2 years later. Still in the same general area as Uncle Rick's place. Sarako journeyed together. Sarah and I had finally gotten married that summer before. It was late autumn, early winter. I was with Amy and Ben again, and also with my 2 cousins on my mom's side, Mark and his younger brother, Kevin. We were staying at a group campsite near this pretty popular lake, and it was the last day of a 4-day fishing trip. I'd brought my German Shepherd Hunter with me. Even though I'd done my fair share of hunting when I was younger, I never really liked carrying a gun. But Hunter, he made me feel safe. He was normally a super chill and friendly dog, audio journey together. But he knew when something was wrong. I figured if we ran into any trouble, he'd be a good deterrent. After all the weird stuff that had been happening, I usually tried to stick with the group whenever we went out in the woods. But this time, I felt pretty confident with Hunter by my side. Plus, it was a popular spot, so I figured there'd be other people around. So, I decided to take a little walk around the lake with Hunter. It was afternoon, not too close to sunset, and I was feeling pretty good, especially since I could see other campsites across the lake, audio journey together. My big mistake was letting Hunter follow a creek that branched off from the main trail. There was more snow on the ground this time compared to the last incident, but not enough to worry about. Hunter was plowing right through it, no problem. But he seemed to be tracking something, our audio journey together, not just following the creek. It was like he'd trying to find where it was coming from. He seemed pretty determined, so I just followed along. Then it happened again. The woods went silent. Not gradually like last time, but instant. Like someone had flipped a switch. Audio journey together. The trees stopped swaying in the breeze, all the animal noises disappeared, and that heavy, suffocating feeling settled in. Hunter felt it too. His ears went down, and he started whimpering. I started to panic. I was about to bolt, and again, I felt that presence. That feeling of being watched. Chills went down my spine. Hunter was barking like crazy, and I just wanted to run. Then I heard a voice. If I had to describe it, I'd say it was female again, and it almost sounded like a mix between Amy and Surd, but slurred. This time, I could make out the words. It was coming from maybe 15 yards ahead. "I'm over here," it said. Can you come help? I need help. Please help. That was it. My instincts took over. I stumbled backward, trying to get away. Hunter was barking and snarling like I'd never heard him before. I took off, running back towards the main trail, heading back to our campsite the shortest way I knew. I was in full-on flight mode, and this time, I felt like I was being chased. The heavy air seemed to follow me, and I could hear rustling in the bushes and the trees behind me, Arnie together, besides all the noise Hunter was making running beside me. But then, after who knows how long, the heavy air and the sounds just vanished. And a few moments later, we ran into another group of hikers. They were obviously startled by Hunter and me, our audio journey together, and we probably looked like we'd seen a ghost, but I didn't care. I was just glad to be away from whatever that thing was. I was going to tell the hikers that something was chasing us, but I just couldn't do it. It all sounded so insane. Being stalked by voices in the woods. Our creative audio journey together. Who's going to believe that? I think I mumbled some excuse about us just going for a jog or something. I don't think they bought it, but they let us walk back to the campsite area with them, and I was so grateful for that. This whole thing was just getting worse and worse. I was being stalked. Our journey together, I knew that now. But what was it? At first I thought maybe it was some kind of serial killer or something. But no, this felt different. Almost animalistic. I don't know. And those eyes I saw at the cabin, they couldn't have been human. And what was up with that silence, that heavy air, beginning of audio journey together? By this point, I was seriously paranoid, but it was mostly just when I was out in the woods or up in the mountains. And still I hadn't told anyone. Like I said, I was always the rational one, the skeptic. No one would believe me. So, I just kept it to myself, even from Sarah, audio journey together. Because even then, a tiny part of me was still saying it was all in my head. Maybe a side effect of some medication or something, or some elaborate, sick prank. But this past winter, everything changed. That was when I finally knew, without a doubt, that this was real, audio journey together. It was a snowmobiling trip. I don't even know why I agreed to go. I think I got pressured into it. I tried to make up excuses, like saying I had to work or something, but my dad, let's call him George, knew I was free. He somehow talked me into going with him and his buddy, Frank, journey together, on an overnight ice fishing trip. The date was set, and on the morning we were supposed to leave, my heart was already pounding out of my chest. During the ride out, I stuck as close as I possibly could to George and Frank on my snowmobile. I made sure to stay right between them the whole time, so I was never in the front or the back. My paranoia was through the roof. But, as luck would have it, the weather took a turn for the worse. As the sun started to set, it started snowing like crazy. Visibility was terrible. I was still in between George and Frank, begin our creative audio journey together, with Frank in the lead and George behind me. Then my snowmobile started acting up. I started falling behind Frank, but I figured it was okay because George was right behind me, and I could still see Frank's tracks. I was so wrong. I stopped my snowmobile and hopped off to take a look, expecting our George to stop behind me. He didn't. As soon as my engine cut out, there was only silence. The falling snow muffled everything. It was getting dark, and I was alone. I started to panic. And then that all too familiar silence started to creep in. It got heavier and heavier and heavier. I didn't think it was possible for the silence during a gentle snowfall to get any deeper, and the air got heavier and heavier. Then, from the tree line to my left, I heard a voice. Sarah's voice. Over here, it said. It's me. I need you. I grabbed my flashlight from my bag and shined it towards where the sound was coming from. And what I saw, it's burned into my brain. I'll never forget it. At first, it just looked like a pile of pale branches or something. But then I saw those two little pinpricks of light reflecting back at me, and I knew what I was looking at. It was tall, at least 6 feet, and it was standing on 2 legs. It had pale, almost white skin that looked too tight for its body. Stretched over this thin body frame, begin our creative journey together. It looked like if it moved, its bones would rip right through the skin. Its eyes were sunken in, and its cheeks were hollow. It had thin, cracked lips with something black dried on them. But the worst part was its hands. Its fingers were freakishly long, together. The whole thing was freakish, and they ended in these massive, curved black claws. When the light hit it, it let out this unholy shriek. I thought I was going to die. I didn't even think. I just dropped the flashlight, jumped back on my snowmobile, journey together, and started it up faster than I ever had in my life. I didn't care where I was going or where George and Frank were. I just gunned it. I pushed that snowmobile to its limit. I just wanted to get away. I didn't look back. After a few minutes of riding like a bat out of hell, we had a journey together. I finally turned on my GPS and started heading back to where we'd parked our trucks. I didn't slow down once. I don't know how long it took or what time it was. I just know it was dark. When I got to the parking lot, I jumped off my snowmobile and into my truck faster than I've ever moved. Audio journey together. I drove out of there without a second thought. I didn't feel safe until I got home, like half an hour later, and even then I was still terrified by what I'd seen. That thing. The thing that had been stalking me. I don't remember much after that. I just remember locking all the doors and not sleeping a wink that night. And I still didn't tell anyone. Not even Sarah. I told George that I'd just gotten separated from them and headed home. He ended up picking up my snowmobile since he had the trailer. So, here's the problem. Audio journey together. I haven't been near the woods or any place like that since that night, and I don't ever want to go back. But my family, they're starting to plan camping trips again, and I don't know how to tell them I'm not going. And I want to tell them they shouldn't go either. Not with that thing out there. Oh, journey together. But I don't want anyone to know where this happened either. I don't want anyone to go looking for it. I don't want anyone, especially the people I love, to go near that place. I just don't know how to tell them. That's why I'm here. I need to figure out a way to tell them. Arnie together. Thanks for reading all this, and thank you if you believe me. Any advice would be a huge help. I need answers. People need to know that there's something evil out there. The woods were always there, looming at the edge of our neighborhood like some kind of shadowy beast. My friends and I, we were drawn to it like moths to a porch light on a summer night. See, we craved the adrenaline rush, audio journey together, that feeling of your heart hammering in your chest from some made-up, harmless scare. And those woods, they were perfect for that. Ancient trees, thick as a giant's legs, stood hunched together, their branches gnarled and twisted like old witches' fingers. Audio journey together. They creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, a sound that sent shivers down your spine. Our parents, they'd always warn us. Stay out of those woods. They'd say, those trees are gonna fall with the slightest breeze. You'll get hurt. Yeah, right? Like we were gonna listen. We were young. Invincible. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves. We'd pretend to be brave, all swagger and tough talk, but truth be told, we never really got that far into the darkness before our courage crumbled. We'd chicken out, usually after a few minutes, hearts pounding like crazy. Every time we went in, though, we'd mark our progress. A little scratch on a tree, a pile of stones, whatever. And every time we swore we'd beat our last record. Go deeper, stay longer. It was October 29th, 2012, when we had our last adventure. There was me, Alex. Then there was also my best buds, Ethan and Ben. Ethan, being a whole year older, acted like he was some kind of wilderness expert. He was always pulling pranks, hiding behind bushes and jumping out at us. He thought it was hilarious. We thought it was lame, but we'd never let on. This time, we were determined. We were going to push further than we ever had before. We passed our previous markers, each one a tiny victory. Finally, we reached our furthest point, a big oak with April 9, 2012, scrawled into its bark. Beat it, Ethan yelled, doing a little victory dance. We kept going, fueled by a surge of pride. We were explorers, conquerors of the unknown. Or, at least that's how it felt. Not long after, something caught our eye, a pale shape glimmering in the dim light that filtered through the trees. "Whoa, what's that?" Ethan asked, his voice suddenly serious. "I don't know," I said, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Let's check it out." As we got closer, the shape began to solidify. It was an old bunker, half buried in the earth, its concrete walls stained with moss and age. Already together, we weren't too surprised to stumble upon a bunker. We were in a country where there were still thousands of them from WWU. Still, it was a cool find. We scrambled inside, eager to explore. The interior was empty, stripped bare. Except for one thing. A gaping hole in the center of the floor. A spiral staircase disappearing into the darkness below. "Foa, let's go down," Ethan said, already starting to descend. "I don't know, man," Ben said, his voice wavering. "Looks kinda stairs break. We'll be trapped." "You're just scared," Ethan teased, body journey together. Disappearing further into the hole, Ben and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to admit we were nervous, but we weren't about to let Ethan go down there alone. So, with a shared shrug, we followed him into the abyss. The stairs were metal, cold and clammy beneath our hands, journey together. They felt solid enough, but each step echoed loudly in the silence, a sound that seemed to amplify the deeper we went. After what felt like an eternity, I started to get seriously creeped out. "How far down does this thing go?" I asked, my voice echoing strangely. Ethan, always the show off, grabbed Ben's flashlight and, without a word, dropped it into the darkness. We watched as it tumbled down, until it was swallowed by the black. "Holy crap," Ethan breathed. "I can't even see it anymore." "Okay, that's it. We gotta go back," Ben said, his voice laced with panic. "This is insane." "No way," Ethan insisted. "We have to see where this goes." We argued, of course. Ben was ready to bolt, and honestly I was too. But Ethan, he could be persuasive when he wanted to be. After a lot of pushing and a little bit of name-calling, Ben caved. And so, let's begin our creative journey together. We continued our descent. It took us at least 10 more minutes to reach the bottom. 10 agonizing minutes of echoing footsteps and mounting dread. The air got thicker, warmer, and more humid the further down we went. I could feel a film of sweat forming on my forehead. It was like stepping into a furnace, a musty, damp furnace at the bottom of the world. Finally, we reached the bottom, and that's where our adventure went from exciting to utterly terrifying. The bottom of the staircase opened into a large, circular chamber. It was bare, except for a single, heavy metal door on the far side. The floor was covered in a thick layer of mold and grime, and in the center lay the mangled remains of Ben's flashlight, twisted and broken from its long fall. "It's locked," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. A sliver of hope flickered within me, and let's begin our creative audio journey together. Maybe this was it. Maybe we'd have to turn back. I guess that's the end of the line, huh? But Ethan, predictably, was already on the hunt for a way to open it. He ran his hands along the walls, searching for a hidden switch or a button. It didn't take him long to find something. A small metal panel, almost hidden behind a patch of particularly thick mold. "How?" he exclaimed, prying the panel open with his fingers. Inside, nestled amongst a tangle of wires, was a large lever. "I'm gonna pull it," he announced, not even bothering to ask for our opinions. "Ethan..." "Wait," I started, but it was too late. With a grunt, he yanked the lever down. A loud conk echoed through the chamber, followed by a slow, grinding sound. The heavy metal door began to slide open, revealing a dark, narrow hallway beyond. Ethan, beaming with triumph, journeyed together, stepped through the doorway first. I followed close behind, and Ben, now without a flashlight and clearly terrified, brought up the rear, practically glued to my back. The hallway was lined with cells, their iron doors rusted and ajar. Each door had a date etched above it, a chilling record of some unknown event. On July 8, 1957, August, September 56, September 10th, 1956. The first few cells we peered into were empty, save for dust and cobwebs. But as we crept further down the hallway, a growing sense of unease settled upon us. The air felt heavier here. charged with a silent, suffocating dread. Then, at the very end of the hallway, we saw it. Or rather, them. In the corner of the last cell, huddled on the floor, were three figures. They were human-shaped, but horribly emaciated. Audio journey together. Their bodies reduced to little more than skin stretched taut over bone. They looked like skeletons, draped in loose, pale skin that hadn't rotted, despite the dates showing they'd been in there for more than 50 years. Are they dead? I whispered, my voice trembling. Begin our cradio journey thither. As if in answer, one of the figures twitched. Its head lolled to the side, and it let out a dry, rasping sound that was almost a sigh. We froze, our blood turning to ice. Then, with a sickening jolt, we realized that there were more of them. Others journey together, clinging to the ceiling like grotesque spiders, their limbs impossibly long and thin. They dropped down in front of us, blocking the exit, their movements jerky and unnatural. Their eyes were soon shut, thick black thread crisscrossing the empty sockets. Their rib cages were distended. Audio journey together, far too many ribs crowded together beat their paper-thin skin. They were monstrous. Not human, not anymore. Arduin? Ben screamed, his voice cracking with terror. Panic seized us. We scrambled back, trying to push past the creatures, their long, skeletal arms reaching out, grasping at us with surprising speed. Their movements were erratic, almost like they were twitching, and yet they were terrifyingly quick. Ben and I managed to squeeze past them, diving under their grasping limbs. But Ethan, he wasn't so lucky. He stumbled, journeyed together, momentarily trapped between two of the creatures. Don't leave me, he yelled, his voice filled with a desperate plea as he tried to wrestle his way free. One of the creatures lunged, its arm extending with unnatural speed. The long, bony fingers pierced Ethan's stomach, sinking deep into his flesh. Ethan gasped, a choked, gurgling sound. He didn't scream. He just went limp, his eyes wide and vacant, his body held upright only by the creature's arm impaling him. Ben and I, paralyzed by horror for a split second, knew there was nothing we could do. We had to get out of there. We turned and ran. Our footsteps were muffled by the thick layer of mold on the floor, a small mercy in the echoing silence. The creatures, for a moment, seemed to ignore us, focused on Ethan's lifeless body. But as we reached the metal staircase, audio journeyed together, our feet clanging against the steps. The silence was shattered. The sound echoed through the chamber, a dinner bell for the horrors behind us. Without looking back, we scrambled up the stairs, the metallic clang of our ascent a terrifying soundtrack to our escape. I was a few steps ahead of Ben. Just a few. Then I heard a scream, a blood-curdling shriek of agony that echoed up from the depths of the staircase. It was Ben. I didn't stop. I didn't even pause. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was gone. There was no going back for him. All I could do was run. Up the stairs, through the bunker, and out into the woods. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed in protest. I didn't stop running until I reached the warm, familiar glow of the streetlights that lined my neighborhood. I collapsed on my own doorstep, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. Safe. For now. But broken. Utterly and completely broken. The adventure was over, and two of my friends were gone. I woke up in my own bed, the morning sunlight streaming through my window. For a moment, just a fleeting moment, journeyed together. I thought it had all been a nightmare. A terrible, vivid nightmare. Then the memories came crashing back, each one a fresh wave of horror. I told my parents everything. Sobbing, stammering, I poured out the whole story. The woods, the bunker, the creatures, Ethan and Ben. Everything. At first they didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. It sounded insane. But then, the news started to spread. 2 boys missing. Ethan and Ben. Their parents were frantic, the police were involved, and suddenly, my insane story started to gain a horrifying credibility. The police launched a massive search and rescue operation. They found the bunker, easily enough. My directions were, after all, etched in my memory. They even found the entrance to the underground chamber, the heavy metal door still ajar, just as we had left it. But they found nothing else. No sign of the creatures, no evidence of Ethan and Ben, not even a trace of the struggle that had taken place. The cells were empty, just as they had been when we first found them, save for dust and the chilling dates etched above the doors. The investigation dragged on for weeks, then months. But it was fruitless. My story couldn't be corroborated. There was no physical evidence to support my claims. Ethan and Ben were simply gone, vanished without a trace. The case went cold, filed away as another unsolved mystery. But I know the truth. I saw what I saw, and I know those things are still down there, in the darkness, waiting. The disappearances didn't stop. Other kids, other teenagers, vanished in the years that followed. Not just in our town, but in neighboring towns too. Always near wooded areas, always without a trace. Unsolved mysteries, the news reports called them. Tragic, unexplained disappearances. But I know what happened to them, and I know it's my fault. We should never have gone down those stairs. We should never have pulled that lever. We should never have opened that door. Together, we unleashed something terrible upon the world. Something that had been locked away for a reason. Now, it's out there, roaming free, feeding its insatiable hunger. The guilt is a heavy weight, a constant companion. I see Ethan and Ben in my dreams, their faces contorted in terror. Let's begin our creative audio journey together. Their eyes pleading for help that I couldn't give. I hear their screams echoing in the silence of the night. I'm haunted by the memory of those creatures, their skeletal forms, their soon shut eyes, their inhuman movements. And I'm haunted by the knowledge that they're still out there. Begin our creative audio journey together. Waiting in the darkness. I live with the burden of what I've done. The burden of the unanswered silence. The burden of knowing that I'm the only one who knows the truth. And the truth is a monster, far more terrifying than any fairy tale. We never should have opened the bunker. We never should have opened the bunker. And now, it's too late. It's far too late.